Hello, I'm Lee Sales. It's 5:30 on the eastern seaboard, and that means in 30 minutes polling booths will close, bringing an end to the longest election campaign in a generation. In the past 3 terms of Parliament, Australia has had as many Prime Ministers as in the previous 3 decades. Will we have another by the end of tonight? Over the coming hours, the ABC will bring you everything you need, from the earliest figures in the tiniest booths to the victory speech of the next Prime Minister. It'll be edge of the seat viewing, so stick with us. This is Australia Votes. You're with us in the ABC Election Centre. We're plugged directly into the Australian Electoral Commission, and we've assembled the best technology, equipment and know-how that we can to bring you the clearest results as quickly as possible. To keep you company tonight and explain everything you need to know, with me on the panel are the ABC's political editor Chris Uhlmann, our sharpest political commentator Annabelle Crabb, and from Melbourne, Insiders anchor Barry Cassidy. Political reporters Sabra Lane and Greg Jennett are at Labor and Liberal headquarters and will cross to them throughout the night. And from 6 p.m, 2 senior politicians from both camps will join the panel. The Treasurer, Scott Morrison, representing the Liberals, and the Shadow Trade Minister, Senator Penny Wong, for Labor. It goes without saying that no ABC election night would be complete without Australia's most astute election analyst, the incomparable Anthony Green. Anthony, legend, I will come to you first. Tell us, where is tonight going to be won and lost?
Well, it's been a fact of life for about the last 15 years that Australian elections tend to be decided in New South Wales and Queensland for peculiar reasons of history and geography. It seems to be that there are more marginal seats in those states. If the Liberal Party start to lose seats in those 2 states, then other states come into play. It makes it much more interesting. There may only be a few seats change in Victoria. We've seen the CFA dispute change the mood in that state. And then in South Australia, the Nick Xenophon factor, a completely unknown factor at this election, a breakdown of the 2-party system in one state.
Chris, often where the leaders spend their final days can be quite telling. So give us a bit of insight into what they've been doing.
Well, the final day was spent in Sydney, and mirroring what Anthony said, most of their time's been spent in Queensland and New South Wales when you add up where they've been. Turnbull on a defensive play and Bill Shorten making aggressive moves, as he has to. He's got to pick up 21 seats based on the last Parliament. But just looking through the last week, I get an impression of fading expectations from the Labor Party, moving down from Queensland, where they hoped to pick up 7 seats at the outset. They're talking about 3 now: Petrie, Flynn, Capricornia, and not really sure of all of those. In New South Wales, they're talking about Patterson, Eden Monero, Macquarie, and then a list that's where they're just ahead under that on MacArthur and Dobell, Page at 50-50. There is one interesting seat, though, to watch in New South Wales tonight, and that is the seat of Warringah, which is, of course, Tony Abbott's seat. Now, the Liberal Party started moving resources in there this week. There was a robocall from the Prime Minister on Monday. There was a letter from the Prime Minister endorsing Tony Abbott this week. So there are concerns there because he will get no preferences from anyone. If he drops far below 50%, then he could be in trouble there. So one to watch. And again, moving on to Victoria, big problems with the CFA there, which means that the seats that Labor had hoped to pick up. So there are enough seats on a good night around the country for the Labor Party to take this election. I think the expectation at this side, though, is that the government is returned with a reduced majority.
Let me ask you, Barry, for your analysis.
Well, it's fraught this time around for a couple of reasons. That people are telling pollsters, somewhere between 21 and 27% of people telling pollsters this time they're not voting for one of the major parties. That makes the preference deal fraught. Secondly, as of last night, people were telling pollsters, 8% of them, that they were still undecided. So again, that adds an element of uncertainty. But from what I'm being told is that the government will lose minimum 4 seats to Labor, maximum 16. And by that I mean there are 12 seats in play here that neither side can call with any real certainty. Now, when you consider that 12 seats, if they were to break majority to Labor, and then you add the 4 plus maybe a couple of Xenophons, perhaps Rob Oatshock, Tony Windsor, whatever, then the government would be in some danger of being in minority government. If they were to break the other way, if those 12 seats were to break in favour of the government, then sometime after the election, Bill Shorten would have an argument with Anthony Albanese.
Let me bring in Annabelle, Anthony mentioned South Australia. Everyone's going to be watching that. You are a South Australian. What is going on in your home
Well,
state?
it is a funny old night on election night when everyone's looking at South Australia. So as a South Australian, I take a perverse sort of pleasure in that. Look, Nick Xenophon's decision to go from being a single issue operator and a sole operator to designing a party in his own image seems at this stage to have paid off for him hugely well. He's polling at extraordinary levels in South Australia, and there's a couple of reasons for that. One is that South Australia is sometimes in a state of feeling like it misses out nationally. You know, we're at the end of the river. Recent years have seen the closure of the Holden plant, Whyalla, the steelworks going into freeze earlier this year is a big factor. And so there is a great appetite, I think, in South Australia for listening to somebody who is talking about South Australia in the first instance, not just as a knock-on from other issues. So Nick Xenophon tonight is going to provide an enormous amount of viewing interest. He is being touted as possibly being in the running for anywhere between 1 and 4 Senate seats. He is viewed as a distinct possibility with his local candidate in the seat of Mayo, which is Alexander Downer's old seat, and currently held by Jamie Briggs, who is very nervous tonight, I imagine.
And as you say with Nick Xenophon, it's interesting because we'll be looking at him in both the House of Reps and in the Senate. This election began in dramatic fashion as a double dissolution. It was triggered by legislation that seemed to fade from view as soon as the campaign rolled out. Chris, can you and Anthony remind us what happened with that?
Yeah, so it was 2 bills, and they were basically union taming bills. One was the Building and Construction Commission bill, the other was the Registered Organisations bill. But Anthony, what was interesting about that was not just the bill themselves, but the mechanism the Prime Minister used to get the Senate back was there in the Constitution, but not many people had paid attention to it.
Yeah, it's the most intriguing use of the Constitution since the Whitlam government. First, they had to try and change the electoral system because they couldn't have a double dissolution under the existing electoral system. They got that through, but getting that through delayed the passage of getting the double dissolution triggers. So they then called the Parliament back, prorogued the Parliament, called it back specifically to deliberate on those bills, something that hasn't been seen since the first double dissolution in 1913. And then because of the timing issues, trying to avoid losing a year off the term because of the double dissolution, they had to issue the writ, they had to do the dissolution by the 11th of May, which meant bringing the budget forward. And then once they'd got all that through, getting supply through, and then having an 8-week campaign so that the election date was on the 2nd of July. So it's been going for quite a long time, and it's taken quite a bit of navigation to avoid those rocks and shoals of the Constitution.
And before all that, of course, they changed the rules on how the Senate's elected, and then we have a double dissolution election. Can you tell us what that means for tonight? Will the Prime Minister get a better Senate this time around than the one he had last time?
Well, a half-Senate election would have left 7 of the crossbenchers in place until 2020, which is why they've gone the double dissolution path. There will be people but Ricky Muir elected from 0.5%. That can't happen under the new system. But with a double dissolution and the quota only 7.7, if a party can get to 4%, it's got a chance of getting elected. And there's a few of those dotted around the country.
Yeah, and we're talking about places, Lee, like in Queensland, we're hearing that Pauline Hanson is really doing quite well, that the Liberal Party expects that she will win a seat there. It's possible that Glenn Lazarus might retain his seat. In Tasmania, Jackie Lambie more than likely returned. As you say, 3 or 4 in South Australia. So the Prime Minister may not get the Senate that he wants.
It's a big roll of the dice that he's taken, isn't it?
It's pretty ironic, really, that that this should be. And remember, back to the beginning of this year, the issue on which Malcolm Turnbull really seized the initiative. Back when he was flagging in the polls, people were starting to ask questions about whether he really had the ticker for this job. And the defining moment where he asserted the leadership was to bring on this sort of choice for their crossbenchers between the double dissolution and their own mortality. The weird thing is that because this has turned into a double dissolution, the quotas that you need to get elected are halved, and so there's the prospect of a whole flock of entirely different annoying senators to persecute Malcolm Turnbull and his colleagues over the next parliamentary term.
And how has the coalition government been, Chris, at negotiating with those senators individually? I mean, we haven't really seen any evidence that they're particularly good at managing.
They're hopeless. The thing is, too, that we knew that Senate was coming for 6 months, remember, before it arrived. Was there any fating of the people to try and get them across the line? Now, individual ministers did manage to get some stuff across the line, but working as a group, they seemed almost determined to alienate them. So they're going to have a different strategy in the Senate the next time around.
Well, the odd thing is, of course, that Malcolm Turnbull quietly made friends with a few of them in the background, Jackie Lambie in particular, but he's pretty much estranged them now with his attempt to blast them out of existence.
Well, who are the people to whom the coalition is the closest, who are likely to be returned, do you think, in the Senate?
Well, ironically, we'll see whether or not Liberal Democrats have a chance in the Senate, and David Leyonhjelm was more likely to pass the legislation that the government puts up when it comes to trying to save any money in the Senate. But in fact, what we'll end up with most likely is a highly protectionist, inward-looking, Australian-made Senate. Now, that will present enormous problems for this government with the kind of agenda that it will want to prosecute.
The coalition has got 33 seats in the Senate out of a 76-seat chamber, and they generally, in a sort of shorthand, tend to count David Leyonhjelm and also Bob Day, the Family First senator from South Australia, as kind of approximate coalition votes. There's a lot of resignation within coalition ranks that they will actually go backwards at this double dissolution election.
What about the Greens? What's their Senate expectation?
Well, they've got 10 at the moment, and they'll be looking to increase that. I mean, one of the interesting things about this swirling and enormous third-party vote is that it's scattered all over the place, right? In different states, it goes to different places. There's still a lot of disaffection with the major parties. The major parties' primaries are still very, very low. There's all of these other options sloshing around. So if that turns into Pauline Hanson in Queensland.
Yep.
Let me pull Barry Cassidy in. Barry, what's your take on this potentially very tricky scenario with the Senate?
I think there are three players in the Senate. Richard Di Natale and his gang of, I think, 9 beyond this election. I think they'll drop one. Jackie Lambie, who might have a couple from Tasmania, and Nick Xenophon, who could have 3 or 4 in South Australia. So on Annabelle's figures, the coalition, if they drop to 32, for example, they need 6. They won't be able to rely on the Greens all that often, so they'll be looking for a combination of Nick Xenophon, Jackie Lambie, and whoever else bobs up.
Could any government, even the most, government most skilled at negotiating in the world, deal with a Senate where you've got people that run the full gamut from, Liberal Democrats to sort of Trotskyist Greens?
No, it's really difficult. But then you look at in the latter stages of this government, they did actually do a deal with the Greens on an issue that contradicted Labor. So it can happen, and we don't yet know the makeup. There will be, apart from those 3 key players that I mentioned, there'll be individuals too that'll break through. We just don't know who they'll be just yet.
What it really relies upon, I think, Lee, is having a capable negotiator in the Senate. And Matthias Cormann has stepped into this role a little bit, that is able to keep on good terms with all of those moving parts.
Well, for most of the minor parties, the Senate is the main game, but 2 of them are setting their ambitions a little grander tonight. The Greens expect to hold the seat of Melbourne, and they also want to pick up 2 neighbouring electorates, Batman and Wills. And the Nick Xenophon team is hoping for a sweep in Adelaide. They're eyeing the seats of Mayo and Sturt in particular. Nick Xenophon and the Greens leader Richard Di Natale are with us now. Firstly to you, Senator Xenophon, what's the mood been like there in Adelaide today? And realistically, what do you think you can hope to achieve tonight?
We're also eyeing the seat of Boothby, where Karen Hockley's put in a strong campaign. Look, can I just say the vibe I got from polling booths, from the queues and being in a queue for a while earlier today, was that it seems pretty flat. Maybe it's the weather, maybe it's the long campaign, maybe there's a certain air of resignation. I don't think the baseball bats are out for the government, but I'm hoping that enough South Australians will want to see a strong voice for them from the political centre in the Senate and in the House of Reps.
How about you, Senator Di Natale? What was the sort of reception you were getting out there today?
Well, I focused on some of those seats you just talked about, Lee. I was in Batman, Melbourne Ports, Higgins and Wills, and the mood was terrific, actually. Lots of people taking Greens how to vote cards, not interested in the other how to vote cards. People very, very keen for a different voice in both the lower house and in the Senate. People were saying to me how they couldn't believe that the issue of dangerous global warming was almost completely ignored during this election campaign, and yet for many people across the country, it is the defining issue of this generation. They were dismayed at the race to the bottom on the treatment of innocent people seeking asylum, and people just desperate for a different conversation about how we can treat innocent people. So very, very positive. And I think what we've done during this campaign is put ourselves in the contest. It's hard because you've got the Labor and Liberal Party joining together, and when they do that and swap preferences, it means we've got to get over their vote combined, which makes it a really tough challenge. But I think you'll see a huge swing to the Greens in those key inner city seats and hopefully make a breakthrough in one of them or even more.
Well, you mentioned the seat of Higgins, which is held by the high-profile Government Minister Kelly O'Dwyer. How realistic do you think your chances are of taking that seat? Because it's not one that's traditionally put on those lists of seats that the Greens have a really decent chance of winning.
Well, we're coming from a long way back, but we've run an incredible campaign there, Lee, and we've got a terrific candidate in Jason Ball. He has run an amazing campaign, and we've had, I think, 15,000 people who have been door-knocked by, for us it's hard. We don't get the big corporate donations, we don't want them. So we rely on those field campaigns, knocking on doors, ringing people up. And we've knocked on a lot of doors, spoken to a lot of people. And again, the feedback very, very positive. And as I said to Jason, I said when he took on this role, these are seats that are tough to get over the line at this election because we've got that preference swap. But what you will see is these seats turn green. If it's not at this election, it'll certainly be at the next one.
Nick Xenophon, are you hoping to take the seat of Grey? Do you think you're in with a show there?
Well, I spoke to Andrew Broadfoot, our candidate, just a few minutes ago. There's a strong mood for change. Of course, Whyalla, the steelworks is a big issue. The federal government hasn't made a real commitment to save those steelworks and save 5,000-6,000 jobs, but also the issue of the solar thermal plant at Port Augusta. And there is a real concern about plans to drill for oil in the Great Australian Bight. That's concern the fishing industry and environmental groups. So I don't know. I mean, Anthony Green says it's an unknown for him. If it's an unknown for Anthony, what's going to happen in South Australia, it's a mystery to me.
Nick Xenophon, what would you like the Senate to look like after this double dissolution election? How many of your friends and compatriots do you expect to be there?
Annabelle, I don't know. I'm hoping for at least 3 and maybe 4 or 5 because we're still in with a chance in other states. We've run strong campaigns with very limited resources in those states, and I think that 12th seat and indeed the 11th seat might be up for grabs. We won't know about those seats for a number of days because of the new Senate voting system.
Senator Xenophon, in the states other than South Australia, I know I hear you describe yourself always as cautiously pessimistic, but in what parts of Australia would you say that you feel like you're getting a good vibe?
Look, there's been a good vibe in all the states. I mean, I think particularly New South Wales and Queensland, Victoria, people are concerned about manufacturing jobs there. And in the West, Luke Bolton there has run a good campaign as well. And Tassie, I think the Jackie Lambie phenomenon there will take a lot of votes. I expect Jackie will get at least 2 in Tassie, but Lee, if Anthony Green can't work it out in South Australia, I certainly can't work it out in the rest of the country.
All right, well, look, we'll stay in touch with you two throughout the night and come back to you. Thank you very much for joining us at this early stage.
Pleasure.
The ABC has made following tonight's election really easy for you. The results will be posted online at abc.net.au/Australia Votes. And if you're taking to the roads for any reason, you can have the company of Fran Kelly and Marius Benson on ABC News Radio. Now seems like a good time to welcome News Breakfast's Michael Rowland to explain his role in tonight's coverage. Michael, where are you and what are you doing?
Yes, good evening, Lee. Good evening, panel. I'm high above you in the heavens of the ABC's Ultimo Centre. In fact, never has this centre looked so fantastic because I get to play with some terrific visual tools to explain how the vote is going tonight, starting with this absolute beauty. It is a virtual map of Australia, coalition seats represented by blue triangles, Labor seats by red, Greens by, you guessed it, Green MP Adam Bandt and Grey by the 4 crossbenchers in the last parliament. So the coalition having 90 seats, the Labor Party 55, Green 1, 4 crossbenchers now. As the Prime Minister did at the start of the campaign, let's dissolve that map of Australia, dissolve that parliament, and as the course of the night goes on, each of those triangles will be filled in according to which party wins which seats in either states or the territories. Now that's fantastic, but I'm even more excited about this. Here on the ABC shiny disco floor, we are going to transport you to Canberra with a virtual House of Representatives chamber. The Labor Party's troops on my right, the Prime Minister's troops on my red. And as the night goes on, we will see both sides of Parliament filled up with red seats won by Labor, blue by the Coalition. But as you've been discussing downstairs, keep an eye here in the crossbench section of Parliament, because if the Greens do better, they win 1 or 2 more seats, there'll be more Green. And in particular, if Nick Xenophon does as all those polls suggest he will do and win extra seats in South Australia, expect to see more grey seats there at the back of the chamber. And if the result is very, very close tonight, expect to see a possible hung Parliament with either Malcolm Turnbull or Bill Shorten there having to negotiate with the Greens and the crossbenchers. So a very exciting, and for me at least, up here, a very colourful evening ahead. Back to you on the panel.
Thank you, Michael. I look forward to seeing you activate the disco ball over the disco floor a little bit later in the evening. There are 150 electorates up for grabs tonight, but as we heard from Anthony and Chris earlier, not all electorates are created equal. New England, for instance, has had more than its fair share of attention over the past 8 weeks, mostly because the former member, Independent Tony Windsor, decided to throw his hat back into the ring, challenging the dominance of the sitting member, the Nationals leader and Deputy Prime Minister, Barnaby Joyce. Tony Windsor joins us now from his campaign office in Tamworth. Thanks for being there, Mr. Windsor. What are your volunteers reporting back to you today that they're hearing on the ground?
Oh, well, we'll get the information through as time unfolds, but pretty positive on the ground. It varies a little bit across the electorate, but in Tamworth and Armidale, the major centres, the reports have been pretty positive. In the new part in the south, I think we're sort of around the 50-50 level down there. A little bit harder to tell in the grazing belt, which is the sort of Walker, up through Glen Innes to Tenterfield and around Inverell. I think they'll be stronger for Barnaby Joyce than for me, but pretty positive across the electorate. Generally, not a lot of negatives at all.
We've had some reports come through that there's a sign at your campaign function tonight saying no news limited media allowed. Is that correct?
Yes, it is.
And what's that about?
Well, I don't want them here. That's what it's about. That's what it says.
But why?
ABC,
we live in a free democracy. Just wondering, why would you do that?
And we pay the rent on the office. Yeah.
Chris?
Yeah, look, it's been really willing. You decided to roll up your tent last time around. I know that was a very, very difficult decision for you. Was it worth it, making this comeback?
Oh, very much so, Chris. Yeah, no, I believe in a number of substantive issues, and I would have been walking past a standard that I wasn't prepared to accept if I just walked away. So no, I'm very pleased. We've had a great day today, and we've had extraordinary support, not just in the electorate. I'd imagine we've probably our booth workers, 97% of them would be from within the electorate, but we've had offers of assistance from outside that we didn't need. We've got a number of people from Melbourne here, for instance. There's a couple from Melbourne that are helping us out. There's been an extraordinary financial contribution from thousands of people. So it's touched a nerve, but the major issues in terms of the future that I've been concerned about revolve from communications, NBN, the Gonski issues, etc., renewable energy, climate change, how we come to grips scientifically with some of the extractive industries and the impact on agriculture and water, etc. So we've had a great time. I actually enjoy election campaigns, and this one's been most enjoyable.
Mr. Windsor, looking from the outside, it seems to have been probably among all of the electorates the one where there's been the most vitriol. Have you felt like it's been a different campaign to ones you've been involved with up there previously?
Slightly, Lee. But I lived through a hung parliament, as you're well aware. Nothing like the vitriol that was in that particular parliament, so maybe you get a bit hardened to it. There was a bit of nasty stuff in the last week on a personal level. That indicates to me, and you'd know as well as anybody, that when that sort of stuff starts to happen, it means there's panic going on. And even last night, this is not in a nasty sense, but last night, to show that the seat is very close, Malcolm Turnbull, the Prime Minister, started to robocall people right across the electorate. So it's a tight seat, and when seats are tight, they not only get a bucket of cash thrown at them, which has been interesting to watch in the last 6 weeks, to say the least, but they also get a bucket of vitriol to try and eradicate whoever the competitor is through smear and innuendo.
All right, Mr. Windsor, thank you very much. We'll be watching with great interest what happens there. Let me pull Barry Cassidy back into our conversation now. Barry, I wanted to ask you about opinion polls. And so we've seen opinion polls in recent days come back and show that nationally it's a very close contest. But I'm thinking back to the Queensland state election where I don't recall any opinion polls predicting that gigantic landslide. Are those close 51-49 or 50-50 polls to be trusted?
No, you can't really rely on them because they're too broad in nature, and even if they indicate a 3.5–4% swing, you can't apply that swing across the board anyway. And that's why I rely more on the briefings that you get from the major parties in terms of what's going on in the marginals. And when I mentioned before that there are 12 seats that are just too close to call, 5 of those, as I understand it, are in New South Wales, so I'll certainly be keeping a close eye on that. Lee, can I just point out, just before I came on air, I got a call from a source in the Liberal Party who wanted me to know that the superannuation issue really hurt. And the point that he wanted to make is that it hurt the base and it impacted on the number of volunteers at booths around Australia and the level of enthusiasm among those volunteers. Now, that just gives you a sense of what the first challenge facing Malcolm Turnbull, if and when he is elected, will be around that superannuation issue from within his own party.
And Barry, looking at Victoria, can you tell us what effect the Country Fire Association fight with the Andrew government had? Is it going to affect the battle in Corangamite, Dunkley?
My view before the CFA issue blew up is that Labor wasn't going to win any seats in Victoria, but this, of course, I think probably took that beyond question, mainly because the marginals just happen to be seats where, at least on the fringes of those seats, the CFA is very active. And that will be a real annoyance for Bill Shorten. You might remember in the 2000 US presidency when Al Gore went very close to winning the presidency and didn't deliver his own state, Tennessee. Well, there'll be a bit of that around from Bill Shorten's detractors. They will be saying, Bill Shorten, you didn't deliver your own state.
Annabelle, on the question of polls and what they can or cannot predict, I mean, what are the odds of a first-term government actually losing?
Well, historically, incredibly low. I mean, it last happened in 1932. So it's hard to remember that because in the last 10 years we've changed prime ministers and governments so often collectively that it seems like a bit of a hurdy-gurdy. Actually, this is the third election in a row that's been contested by a prime minister who's been installed by his or her party rather than staying out a whole term having been elected. But Australians are still very conservative historically about throwing out first-term governments. And so when you factor that into the task that Bill Shorten and his colleagues are attempting, it puts it into a kind of a historical perspective. The interesting thing about the polling, though, I reckon, is that you've got this sort of neck-and-neck perception in the published polls, but there's a huge amount of people who believe that the coalition will be returned. And so there's that disparity.
That can sometimes be a factor, as we know. Okay, it's now only a few minutes until the polls close in the eastern states. We're going to take a short break, so grab your snacks and your drinks and prepare to settle in. Stay with us. This is Australia Votes.
This is a nuisance.
Yeah, I can't
can't do anything on this
And
without
also,
a
so I can go to Barry anytime, right? Even if someone else is in the screen, I can still go to Barry.
Just lift your chair up a touch.
Oh, okay.
One,
I'm
two,
getting
three,
shot.
up. There you go.
Okay, tell Bryony to text me, or you tell me in my ear if Barry is at any point not there. I'm assuming you'll be here till like 6:30 at least. Okay, okay,
Okay.
okay, cool.
But you've
I
added
just
the
didn't know if
notionals here,
I
have
couldn't
you?
see him.
Is
if I
that
could still go in.
157? Right. Okay.
And
Are you hearing things in your earpiece?
No.
It's a reach tell exit
Yes.
poll. Two
Yes,
party
the volume.
preferred 51
Right.
49. Blah, blah, blah.
Oh yeah. Got it. Yeah.
Bill Shorten represents a dangerous threat to our economy.
What I think is dangerous is that this government's tripled the deficit.
We are confident that Australians will return us to government, and it is their decision. Vote for anyone other than my coalition team is a vote for chaos.
You can vote Labor and make sure that we have Medicare and well-funded schools for all Australians. Ready to serve. Ready for government.
Get this right, and together Australians will succeed as never before.
It is now 6 p.m. on the east coast, and that means polling places from Thursday Island in far north Queensland to Southport at the bottom of Tasmania are now closing their doors. Here are some live pictures from one of those polling stations. It's in the Brisbane electorate of Petrie, one of the most marginal Liberal seats in the nation. One of our ABC reporters, Alison Horn, is there, and we'll go to her in a second. But first, let me reintroduce our panel for tonight. With me here in the ABC's Election Centre are political editor Chris Ullman, our top political commentator Annabelle Crabb, and election analyst Anthony Green. From Melbourne, we have Insiders host Barry Cassidy. And our two politicians have just slipped into their seats. Welcome to the Treasurer Scott Morrison and the Shadow Trade Minister Penny Wong. Thank you very much for both coming in with us tonight.
Good to be here.
How has your day been, and what has the mood been like out there? Confident, optimistic, pessimistic? Scott Morrison.
Well, I've been a bit closer to home today. Penny's obviously been here in Sydney. I've been down in my beloved Shire in St George today, and it's been very positive out there on our booths locally, and it's been great to get out and about amongst our volunteers, and I really thank them for their support today. I've obviously spoken to a few of my colleagues and through the various other mechanisms we have to keep in touch, and it's been a pretty busy day out there. I mean, Western Sydney's been very busy. A lot of people on the booths out in Western Sydney, and a lot of resources particularly being moved out that way by both parties. And so, look, I think tonight will be very interesting. It always throws up surprises election nights. I've been through plenty, as has Penny, and we'll wait and see what those surprises are.
Penny, how are you detecting the mood?
Well, I started the day in Adelaide, obviously. I voted with Kate Ellis this morning at the local primary school just around the corner from my house. Pretty positive mood there, I have to say. Also went into Hindmarsh. My observation today in the last few days is probably felt a little bit better on the ground than maybe the polling had suggested. The public polls had suggested. It was a very positive reception. A lot of people talking about Medicare, talking about jobs and penalty rates and education. So, you know, that's a good thing, talking about our issues. I do agree. We might agree occasionally. Depends how much you talk over me and how mean you are, Scott. But,
Straight off the bat, I know.
But I agree with him. I think that tonight there are some real potential wildcards, and I think there are a few seats. You know, South Australia's got a few interesting seats, a few interesting three-quarter contests, and I think I don't think you'll see a uniform result across the country.
So, what at this time, Penny Wong, most worries you?
Well, getting through the night. I'm pretty tired.
Not
I don't know about
coming to
you.
fisticuffs with Scott.
I did 7:30 report with Lee last night, and she was as bad as tired as Matthias and I were.
Yeah,
so
pretty shattered,
if I can get through the night being coherent.
No, I mean specifically when you look at the contest, what's out there. You know, what are you most concerned about?
Oh, look, I just want people who, because of course people are still voting as we speak. You know, I would say to them, if you want to protect Medicare, vote Labor.
I'm going to bust you off those talking points.
Invest in schools, vote Labor.
Scott Morrison,
you should say jobs and growth now.
Yeah, jobs and growth. Let's just get that out of the way.
Well, I'm happy to do that if you like. No, look, today, as people coming into the booths, if they're walking into the booths today and they're focused on the economy and they're focusing on what's right for the economy and stability and issues like that, then I think tonight, we should be successful. But we'll see what the night brings. I mean, first-term governments always have a swing against them.
We know that, and I think that there's some historical references that back those points up. The question tonight will be really to what extent that will play out. We were very successful at the last election in a number of areas where we were very pleased to see, and those members have done very well over the last 3 years working hard. I mean, no harder than in Tasmania, I've got to say. Our 3 members there have really set the gold standard in terms of how, having in many cases them winning seats that we hadn't won for many years, how they go about seeking to retain them. And those fellas down there have left nothing on the field. They have really done a tremendous job.
When Lee was talking to Nick Xenophon a moment ago, he said that he thought he found the mood pretty flat out there. And I guess it would match our experience of this ludicrously long campaign accompanying a sense of disengagement, quite broadly in the electorate. Is that good news for you, Scott Morrison? Because disengaged voters tend to slouch back to incumbents, don't they, generally?
Well, look, I have not detected any mood for change around the country, and I mean, Julie Bishop, who's arguably visited more seats in the country than in anyone else on our side. I mean, Malcolm and I gave her a run for money, but she was really, I think, been in more seats than anyone else on our side of politics. And Julie remarked often throughout the campaign that wherever she went, she just was not picking up any real anger towards the government in particular, and no real sense of a mood for change. I mean, there are single issues here and there, but there was a sense of the awareness of what was happening in the world and the instability that was there, and an appreciation of the need to stick to what they know.
Penny Wong, this discussion about disengagement, is that something that you've sensed out there?
Look, I think this long an election campaign was always going to test how engaged anybody was, wasn't it? I mean, people did get, I think, tired of the lengthy election campaign. I think that became a challenge for all parties.
Everyone got sick. I think a lot of people got sick.
Yeah, people got sick.
What do you think they started talking about Medicare?
That was your opening, wasn't it, Penny?
That's right. We saw Malcolm,
He powered through.
I think issues remained important, and certainly for us. I mean, we had a campaign where there was a lot of field, the field campaign was really good. There was a lot of direct voter contact by telephone, by door knocking, and I think people were responding to issues. But I think you're right. I mean, after 8 weeks of the noise, it's very easy for people to turn off, and it became, I think, a challenge for parties to make sure we talked about issues that people actually could hear.
I mentioned a second ago the seat of Petrie, which is one of the Liberal Party's most marginal seats in the country. One of our reporters, Alison Horn, is standing by. Alison, I'm just wondering, can you give us a sense of, in 2016, how are votes actually counted once the polls shut?
Well, Lee, we saw before the votes, the doors being closed, and you can probably see behind me now that the votes are being tipped out onto the table. This is the green vote, so House of Representative ballots, and it's a massive pile there, a big mess. What needs to really happen now is they'll be sorted into piles. They'll have a number of people working at this desk here to unfold them and put them into piles, and then start counting that primary vote. Now, it would probably take about an hour to an hour and a half for the primary votes here to be counted at larger booths. That may take a lot longer, but here in Petrie, as you just mentioned, it's a very marginal seat. The coalition hold it by just 0.5%. So we may not know tonight if who has won this seat. In other places, those results may be coming in a lot sooner, though.
Well, we will certainly be touching base with you, Alison, to find out a bit later on what's going on. Thank you very much for that. Tonight's contest hinges on marginal electorates, as we've been hearing. Seats where around 4 to 5% of voters opted for the coalition in 2013 but may choose Labor today. The majority of these electorates are in New South Wales and in Queensland, but in a handful of other states we also have some on our watch list. Chris, can you take us through, first of all, some of the Queensland states?
Yeah, OK, so Queensland seats, and here was where Bill Shorten began his campaign. There was enormous enthusiasm about what might happen in Queensland. I got the sense through the course of the campaign that there were diminishing expectations from the Labor Party there. Petrie and Capricornia, two of the most marginal seats in the country there. Some question about whether or not Petrie might even fall tonight. Anthony, can you take us through the seat of Petrie?
Well, the first to seat of Petrie, and I hope those clerks spotted that ballot paper that flew off the edge of the edge.
If there's one vote in it, that might be it.
Anyway, so we saw that happen. I'm sure they spotted that. Luke Howarth, the sitting Liberal MP, the LNP member who won that at the last election, up against Jackie Pedersen from the Labor Party. That's the seat just to the north, in the north of Greater Brisbane area. So that'll be a seat to watch. Right in the centre of Brisbane is the seat of Brisbane. Teresa Gambaro, who's a former member for Petrie, she won Brisbane in 2010 after losing a previous seat in 2007. She's retiring, and there's an interesting contest here that both the Labor Party and the LNP have picked openly gay candidates, which is something that wouldn't have happened once upon a time, you suspect. So Brisbane will be a seat we'll be watching. There'll be a high Green vote in that electorate and a significant flow of preferences to watch out for. Capricornia in the centre of the state is a mining and agricultural district running inland from Rockhampton. That's been won twice by the Nationals and LNP in the last couple of decades, but just for one term, on the defeat of the Keating government and on the defeat of the Whitlam government. And after one term, it went back to Labor. This time, the margin's just 0.8, and Michelle Landry, after having challenged once in 2010, won it in 2013, will have a real battle on her hands in a seat like that. There's been significant changes in the mining industry in that electorate in recent times. And then there's Herbert, which is centred on Townsville. It has a history of going with government, and at this election, Ewan Jones expanded his margin at the last election. He's up against Kathy Toole, who was his opponent at the last election, and we've seen lots of visits and lots of promises in Townsville in Herbert at this election.
And we're in a position now to ask Kathy O'Toole a little bit about her experience at this lengthy election campaign, because she's standing by in a pretty relaxed setting there at the Centenary Hotel in Townsville. Welcome, Kathy O'Toole.
Thank you.
Now, you've fought this seat before, 3 years ago. What was different about fighting it this time?
Look, the major difference about fighting for this seat this time were the amazing policies, the 100 positive policies that the Bill Shorten Parliamentary Party have put together. Labor's policies in this election have been resonating really soundly with the people in my community. It is so easy to have conversations about what Labor's going to do with education. It's very easy to talk to people who are very concerned about Medicare and health. We have the Great Barrier Reef at our front doorstep. We are making amazing investments into the Great Barrier Reef. And of course, jobs are a major issue here. And Bill Shorten stood with me in November last year and committed $100 million for the Townsville Stadium. And then we saw Ewan Jones do it the day before pre-poll. Labor has listened. Bill Shorten has understood that Townsville is the largest city in Northern Australia. We are a regional hub, and we deserve the attention that he gave us in this particular campaign.
Righto, Kathy O'Toole. It's a pity that those ballot boxes have closed, because you've just really made quite a stirring call to action. Listen, this is a seat in which you've had battling stadiums. You've had a lot of action in the last few months because it's the seat where Queensland Nickel's located. I wanted you to give us an idea, since you're the first candidate we've spoken to in Queensland, and we're always absolutely hanging out for intel from Queensland. What's happening up there on the ground? Like, what can you see in terms of other candidates and other parties that are active in your area at the moment? Are we finished with Clive Palmer, for instance?
Well, that's a very good question, and probably only Clive Palmer can answer that question. What we do know is the impact of Clive Palmer's actions at Queensland Nickel have been devastating for this community. It's not only the 850 people who lost their jobs, but there are the small businesses, the contractors that also have suffered terribly as a result of the closing of the refinery. But you know, Townsville people are very resilient people, and we're very capable people. What we need from this federal government, and Labor will deliver it, is a hand up to get confidence back into our business community, to get jobs rolling, and to ensure that we've got the best health system we can have and the best education for our kids.
Okay, Kathy O'Toole, give it to us straight. If Bill Shorten is to become Prime Minister of this country, your seat is going to have to turn to Labor. Have you got there? The margin's 6.2%.
Yes, it's a very big margin, but look, I tell you, this campaign is so different to the last campaign. I am quietly confident, as one needs to be when you come into a contest. This has been a contest, which I think is quite extraordinary for such a large margin, and we sit and we hope. We have worked so hard through this campaign since September last year. I've had a marvellous team behind me. We have worked together. The community has responded really, really well. So we will just sit and hope that we can get across the line, because this has been a magnificent Labor campaign around this country, and particularly here in Townsville.
Right, well, sounds like you've earned a break. Cathy O'Toole, thanks very much for being with us.
And we'll see later.
Thank you very much.
We'll see later if Cathy O'Toole's predictions come to pass. So that's a bit of Queensland. New South Wales is once again a major battleground at this election. And Chris, both the leaders have spent a lot of time here, including, as Scott said, right up to the last minute.
Yeah, and I think this is because this is where most of the 50-50 calls are. And on a good night, the Labor Party could pick up quite a few seats here, say 5 or 6. On a bad night, they might be looking at trying to save a seat like Greenway. Now, I think we're going to start, Anthony, at the seat of Reid, which is not one now that the Labor Party thinks it's going to win.
Yeah, well, this is interesting. Reid was once a rock-solid Labor seat, but it was radically altered 3 elections ago with a redistribution, which has made it much more marginal, moved it further east. And the most recent redistribution...
Like Billy McMahon's old seat.
It's basically been redrawn as Low, which is an old marginal seat further towards the city. And if anyone who knows Sydney's property market knows there's a lot of high-rise and new apartments going into that electorate. So it's not the old Labor electorate it was. And Craig Laundy is got a good chance of defending the seat. And Angelo Sarekis is the Mayor of Canada Bay Council. And the one local issue that's been biting is the amalgamation of the councils, which has been running in the area. The next seat to watch is Lindsay, which has gone with government at every election since it was first contested in 1984. It's outer suburban, mortgage belt, and it just seems to go with government. Fiona Scott won it at the last election, and now she's defending up against Emma Hassar from the Labor Party, who contested Penrith at last year's state election unsuccessfully. On the Central Coast, we've got Robertson, which is a seat which has often gone against the trends. I mean, Labor actually increased its majority in this seat in 2010. That might have had something to do with retiring member at the time. But certainly it fell to Lucy Wicks for the Liberal Party at the last election. She's now defending against Labor's Anne Charlton. That's a seat we'll be watching. 3.1% is about that margin Labor needs to be winning these sorts of seats to be getting close to government. And then the perennial one, Eden Monaro, the bellwether, which is that word, I get to use it for the first time, I think. It's been held by the party that forms government at every election since 1972. Peter Hendy is the sitting member. He's up against Mike Kelly, the former member. It's been quite radically changed on the boundaries. This will be a key seat to watch.
And council amalgamations here has been a big issue, so one to watch.
Yes.
Penny Wong, let me ask you, Chris was saying a little bit earlier that he had detected among Labor ranks a little bit more pessimism about Queensland, feeling like things weren't going so well there. What's your take?
Well, I mean, Queensland is a tough state for Labor. It's been a tough state for a long time. We hold a very small number of seats there compared to the total, and the LNP obviously did a lot better there in the 2013 and the 2010 election. We've got some really good candidates. I think we've run a strong campaign there. Obviously, there's a difference between regional Queensland and the Greater Brisbane area, and I think some different issues playing in each of those. I think Cathy's been a fantastic candidate, and this is her second time running, and so obviously it's a big swing required, but the campaign has been a very strong one on the ground, I think.
Do you think, Scott, that issues that Queenslanders care about are the same as, say, in New South Wales?
I think what we're going to see tonight is a lot of different results in different states. The contests in each of the states will be driven by very different things. Now, Queensland tends to be quite a swing state. It can really move. If a swing's on, then it's really moving.
Certainly
in Queensland.
saw that in the last state election.
We've seen that in the state. We certainly saw it in the state election. But we've seen it in other federal elections as well. And for Labor to make ground tonight, serious ground, they have to win a lot of seats in Queensland. It has been a state that has decided government on a number of occasions. I mean, in New South Wales, we've had a shocking redistribution, which has put Labor ahead in seats like Barton and of course up there in Dobell, Macarthur was redistributed heavily against the coalition, and so there are going to be some tough contests in New South Wales. You go to Victoria, you've got the CFA issue, which has really dominated things there, and as Penny would know, in South Australia, it's a whole different set of issues with NXT running. So I think, particularly in Queensland, if something's not on tonight, then you'll see nothing much happening in Queensland.
Having said that, it is also the state that's delivered a change in government after one term at the state level. So,
Indeed.
I'm saying it is a state as
let me break into
which can swing.
Hold that thought. Let me break into our chat for half a second.
Chris.
No. It's just that Anthony already 18 past 6 on the eastern coast has a couple of early results. Anthony.
Well, one early result.
Oh,
The
there
electorate
you
paper.
How Andy voted.
Put your
about to
glasses
call it.
down.
It's Barry Ugle. There's a 9% swing to the National Party,
There you go.
but that's a polling place of less than 100 votes.
gonna say
that's the sort of count you get very early in the night, so it's not a reliable count. But just to let people know, they are counting votes and they're starting to arrive, but we'll have to wait a little bit longer before I'll call the
So you're not quite ready to call
I'm
it.
not calling that.
All right, okay.
That's Kevin Hogan's family.
Scott Morrison, just talking about Queensland, it'll be a long time obviously before we get Senate results
Yep.
tonight, but the word from the Labor Party people on the booths and the word from your colleagues is that Pauline Hanson's doing very well up there. Is it your expectation that we might see her back in Parliament?
Well, that's what my Queensland colleagues have been saying. But, you know, with the changes that I think we've positively made to the voting system in the Senate, I think we've got to be careful tonight about how much we draw on in terms of what all this means. How will preferences flow? Will they flow at all? What will be the exhaustion rate? All of those things. We can't sort of look at what's happened in past Senate elections and then start inferring things. I mean, Penny's much closer to the Senate as she's from that esteemed House, and I'm a lowly member of the House of Representatives, but Penny will sort of know how that's played out in the past. So, the primary vote in the Senate will be important tonight, but I mean, honestly, that ballot paper in New South Wales today, I mean, you could take it down the beach and lie on it. It was that big.
Well, let me draw in Barry Cassidy. Barry, Scott raises the issue of the ballot paper and also the Penny raised earlier, the volatility that we've seen, say, in Queensland or even also in Victoria. Is this an election where we can actually look at past behaviour to indicate what might happen tonight or not?
Well, I'll give you a real story about ballot papers. Our soundo here turned up this morning in Surrey Road, South Yarra, in the seat of Higgins. He was given his ballot paper and he was heading towards the booth when he noticed it was a ballot paper for the neighbouring seat of Melbourne Ports. So he went back to the desk and he said, this is not the right ballot paper, it's Melbourne Ports. They got the supervisor. He noticed that other Melbourne Ports ballot papers had been torn off the sheet. While he's having this conversation, he swears at least 10 other people went away with Melbourne Ports ballot papers. None of them seemed to notice the difference. None of them came back. The supervisor said he was onto it, and he seemed a bit relieved that at that time it was 8:06 and polling had only been going on for 6 minutes, I think just as well. I mean, that's a real mess up. Both of those seats, by the way, are very interesting. Higgins, because Kelly O'Dwyer is facing a challenge from the Greens, and Melbourne Ports, because it's a genuine three-way contest.
And do you think, Barry Cassidy, that Higgins really is in play tonight?
No, I don't. I think, though, in the end it might go to preferences, which is quite a development in a seat like Higgins, which has some big names attached to it, Peter Costello being one. So I think the vote will be interesting, and I think it will encourage the Greens next time around to start shooting for seats that are of a similar demographic to Higgins.
Penny Wong, on the point Scott made earlier about that you can't necessarily work out how the Senate might go based on what's happened in the past. What's your take on that?
Well, the first point I think we do need to make is that if Pauline Hanson gets in, if a range of other independents and minor parties get in and there's an unmanageable Senate for whoever wins, really Malcolm Turnbull has to take responsibility for that. He chose to go to a double dissolution for whatever tactical reason. I think we almost lost the tactical kind of argument for that during the campaign.
He wanted to pass a bill.
Well, and you may end up not even if you win government, which, I hope you don't, but even if you did, you'd have to question whether you would even have the numbers in a joint sitting. But leaving that aside,
20 past 6, you're calling we can't get numbers in the Senate.
I'm just saying that you've halved the quota by calling a double dissolution, which opens the door to the Pauline Hansons and others in the world. So I did find it interesting when the Prime Minister was urging everybody not to vote for independence, and obviously he was primarily focusing on the House. I thought, but you've created a situation where it's going to be easier for Pauline Hanson and others to get into the Senate.
She's polling 10% in a seat like Dobell in New South Wales.
Which is above the... Sorry?
She's polling 10% in a seat like Dobell in New South Wales, so Lord alone knows what she's going to poll in Queensland.
Correct.
She might have got a quota in any event.
Well, but as you know, it's you double the quota or half the quota, depending on whether you're in a double D or a half Senate, and so it's going to be easier.
Back to the question of the double dissolution and the centre that throbs at its core, the reinstitution of the ABCC. How important is it to actually get enough votes to get that legislation through in a joint sitting? Is that
It is important. That's why we call a double dissolution on that point. If we want to pass that legislation. We think it's really important legislation to pass, and there was no prospect of that legislation passing under the previous Senate, and so we took advantage of the constitutional provisions that we had available to us to do that, and it has played a role in the course of this election campaign. I wouldn't say it's played the central role. I mean, the economy has, and it has been a subset of that economic that argument we've been making through the course of election. When people have raised that with me, they said, well, you know, this is the basis upon which the election has been called. Well, we called a double dissolution election, so if we were successful, we could pass this bill. Now, the Labor Party's opposed to it, we know that, and the Greens are opposed to it, we know that. So
if you don't get to that magic figure of 114 votes across both houses, that'll be a significant failure on the part of the government.
We've put it to the people because we want to pass that bill. We think it's a really important piece of legislation to pass. That's what we had to do to get it passed, and that's what we've done.
Anthony has some more early figures.
Yes. First, it's Barnaby Joyce ahead 50 on 57.5%. That's one booth is Wollombi, but this is just to get some sense of the figures rolling in at this stage. If we go on to the next lecture, in Dias again, it's one small polling place where Sophie Mirabella is ahead. But again, it's a tiny, just one very small polling place. And in Braddon, we've actually got a couple more polling places. Again, not very many votes. But what we are seeing in that electorate is a 2.5% swing to Labor. So that's the first seat where we've got a sense of a swing that's going on. But this is very early figures. I've got about 12 electorates, and my overall figures are showing no swing at this stage yet.
Okay. Chris, did you want to say something there?
No, it's 2.6% would see that seat tip, that's all.
Just tip.
Just tip.
Right.
We want to ask some other people first, I think.
Before we go any further.
We've been focusing quite a bit on New South Wales and Queensland. I just want to come to Barry Cassidy to ask a question about Victoria. I think it was Chris earlier mentioned the Country Fire Association dispute that's been happening down there. Just for viewers who aren't Victorian, can you just give us a quick summary of what that issue is and your assessment of whether you think that it is playing into this election?
Well, in its most simplest terms, and I can tell you how people in Victoria saw it, they saw it as some sort of union takeover of the CFA. And they love the CFA, of course they do. Victoria is a very dangerous state in terms of bushfires. Daniel Andrews was overseas when it first peaked and really didn't get on top of it to the satisfaction certainly of the media here, but probably to the public as well. And so the issue really did hurt Bill Shorten. It impacted in seats like Latrobe, Corangamite, because they have bush aspects to their seats. Even McEwen, and I think McEwen was a seat that the Liberal Party might have picked up this time around had it not been for the fact that their candidate turned up and introduced himself to Bill Shorten early on. And made a bit of a fool of himself. Otherwise, I think because of the CFA dispute, McEwen could have fallen to the Liberal Party.
Okay, I'm going to come to Penny Wong and Scott Morrison in a minute and ask about some of those issues like the CFA dispute, but I just want to introduce a couple more people who are going to be heavily involved in our coverage tonight. Later tonight, the two leaders will, of course, make their election night speeches. One can only assume that each has a victory speech and a concession ready to go. Party supporters will start to gather over the coming hours. Malcolm Turnbull is at the Wentworth Hotel in Sydney and Bill Shorten is at the Moonee Valley Race Club in Melbourne. We have two of our most experienced political reporters on the ground at each of those locations. Greg Jennett is at the Prime Minister's function and Sabra Lane is at the Shorten one. Let me start with you, Greg Jennett. What has the Prime Minister been doing today? Tell us about his day.
Well, Lee, he did a much publicised casting of his own ballot, as you would expect in the electorate of Wentworth. That was at Double Bay Public School, a street walk at Paddington, and then he decamped in a westerly direction. Unbeknownst to his travelling media pack, he discarded them and jumped on a train, as he is wont to do, our Prime Minister, and he went out to Parramatta. Interesting, significant if we really want to analyse it, because that's a Labor-held seat and one that the Coalition has been working hard on and always saw as a possible pullover if they could get enough support in there. So the Prime Minister lent his shoulder to Michael Beckwith, his candidate there at Parramatta Town Hall booth, and then another train ride further out west to Lindsay, and there he went to Penrith South with Fiona Scott. So I think it was sheerly a question of mobility, though, Lee, with the media pack, you can't cover ground, not that quickly, and he obviously felt that if there was time left, he may as well do what he could. That's how it's been described to me by those who support him in this campaign. So he headed off, and he also got some hopes raised, I hear, in other electorates, including Barton, that he might have been a late show up there, but alas, he wasn't. We've only got reports from those two Western Sydney seats so far.
And Sabra Lane, how about Bill Shorten? What did he get up to today?
Well, he started the day in Sydney and he zigzagged across Western Sydney, dropping into 4 marginal seats: Macquarie, Greenway, Reid and Lindsay. Labor holds one of those seats, Greenway, so that tells you something, that they are a little bit worried about that. But yes, he spent a lot of time there. He also tucked into a sausage, a sizzling sausage there, and the way that he did, Lee, really prompted people to go off on social media over that. He flew down to Victoria afternoon and into Maribyrnong, his home electorate, and voted at the Moonee Valley West Primary School. And he was queued up with a whole line of people. It looked like he was going to be queued up there for quite some time, but the AEC intervened and made sure that he jumped ahead of the queue, so he and Chloe Shorten were able to vote early. I understand that they've gone home to have dinner with their children. I'm of course here at the Moonee Valley Race Club, where you can see behind me it's a little bit festive. We've got some balloons here, and now that the polls have closed, we've got some Labor supporters and poll workers and some Labor faithful coming in here to spend the night here to watch the results come in.
All right, well, Sabra and Greg will be crossing to you both throughout the night. Thank you very much for that. Sabra mentioned there was a bit of a social media brouhaha over Bill Shorten today, but there was also one about Malcolm Turnbull, because Australians take their sausage sizzle very seriously. And so Bill Shorten created a bit of consternation because instead of eating his sausage in a vertical manner, he took a horizontal bite from it. Shocking. And people found this quite shocking.
Yeah,
but Malcolm Turnbull didn't buy a sausage, so people found that outrageous that you'd go to vote without buying a sausage, and then he ordered a green tea.
That's entirely in character, I'd say, but very unnatural behaviour at polling booths. You know, you can get into all sorts of trouble eating weird stuff or not eating weird stuff. Poor old John Kerry, wasn't it, in the United States?
United States, 2004, went to Philadelphia to get it, you know, the sort of dish there, which is a Philadelphia cheese steak. It comes with that liquid cheese, a cheese whiz.
Of course, the aerosol cheese, naturally.
And he asked for Swiss, and it was like, you know, a dramatic drop in his polling numbers in Pennsylvania because of the cheese issues.
Poor guy had to go back there and eat another one, didn't he? You could see the tears running down his face. I want to eat this. But maybe, I don't know, Bill Shorten may just be being prudent at this stage. And I mean, the disinclination of a male MP to place a sausage directly in his mouth is probably understandable on some
Wow,
levels.
I can't believe you're
I'm going to leave that one
pulling,
lie.
Yeah, pulling those gags before.
I was going to say,
it's only That's right. Wait till the children
We're filling time.
We're still in prime time.
Let's go get serious again and go to Anthony Green for a seat run.
We've got a couple of seats sort of dribbling in. This is the electorate of Cowper. The interesting thing here is Rob Oakeshott is coming second at the moment, and the national vote is well done. I can't tell you what polling places they're from, but if that's reflected in later vote, that would be bad news for Lut Hartsuka. But the thing to say about that, there's a big Coffs Harbour urban area, and there's Port Macquarie urban area. All you're getting is sort of small country booths, a small alternative lifestyle, and all sorts of different booths are well away from the coast. So that is not a reliable early figure, I would suggest. Eden Monero, very first figures in for that electorate. But you've got to look where the information is from. And at this stage, that's turning into an 8% swing. I don't have the preference count number of polling places counted there. But I remember last time there was a lot of variability from polling place to polling place. So again, no one should be sort of celebrating or commiserating on those figures at this stage. And then let me go. I did Cowper. Macquarie was the next seat. One very small polling place. I think that's Mount Wilson. So that's not a very meaningful figure. But we just to say on the bottom of the screen there, we've started to tick off the seats that are coming in. You'll see a lot of figures there already for the LNP. Small rural booths comes in. The coalition holds nearly all of the rural electorates in the country. So it's very easy to give away those sorts of seats quite early on. So that's why the LNP figure is sort of jumping ahead there. We don't get many early figures from city areas at this stage of the night.
And indeed, you know, we have less than 1% of the vote counted right now, so we're talking very, very small numbers.
I love this time of the evening where Anthony just gives people a heart attack all over Australia.
Let me come to our politicians and pick up on what Barry was just talking about when I asked him about the CFA. Do you think, Penny Wong, that's been a problem for you in Victoria?
Look, I'm obviously from South Australia, and I haven't been to Victoria in a little while, so I haven't sort of tracked how that's gone. I've seen the media on it, and I've certainly also seen, obviously, the coalition has been wanting to make a state issue a federal issue. I mean, primarily it is a state issue. Well, it is a state issue, and I think voters do make a distinction between state and federal issues, but there's no doubt it's been a focus, certainly of the media and of the Liberals' campaign. I think it's a question as to whether that's actually been translated into an effect on votes.
Victoria, Scott
Bearing
Morrison.
in mind, of course, we are already off a pretty high watermark in Victoria in terms of the Labor Party's position.
Well, indeed, I was just going to say
Yeah.
to Scott Morrison, Victoria has really become a little bit of a problem for the Liberal Party.
Well, I don't think that'll be the case tonight, and I think the CFA will be one of the biggest reasons for that. This has been a white-hot issue wherever you go, whether you've been in a metropolitan seat like Deakin or out in a seat like Bendigo, where I think where I hear that they've put some pressure on the Labor Party out there. Now, I'm not suggesting Bendigo would necessarily fall. But in seats like Corangamite, that it has had an enormous impact in places like that. And the commitment we made was to make amendments to the Fair Work Act which would prevent that from proceeding. So we gave tangible federal relevance to the issue by pointing out we would change federal legislation to prevent what the Andrews government was seeking to do.
Shouldn't you be picking up a seat like McEwen, though, on the back of something like this?
Well, we'll see.
You've had a bit of help closer to home in New South Wales as well from your local state government, haven't you, Scott Morrison? The New South Wales Premier sacked about 40 local councils just as the campaign began and reinstated 20 of them. It seems to be creating a bit of fuss.
Well, there has been a lot of feeling about that, but I must admit, as I've moved around, at least in my part of Sydney, I mean, it hasn't had much of an impact because Sutherland Shire Council was one of the ones not changed.
They weren't touching you.
The Shire borders were secure.
Inviolate.
But more broadly, look, that has been an issue and a talking point. It's been on radio, it's been in other places, but I don't think that has really translated over into a federal election issue in this election. There's no doubt people feel strongly about it, but people know that the federal government doesn't run local government.
Well, a bunch of your federal colleagues did mount a pretty spirited protest publicly saying that they wished you hadn't done it, so maybe they don't agree with you.
Well, look, between state and federal governments, I mean, we all have to get on with the job of government. And Mike Baird needs to get on the job of government. And one of the things I did find, frankly, in campaigning in New South Wales and Queensland, is in Queensland, I was there on State of Origin, the second one, so I was right up and deep in Queensland territory. That wasn't the most pleasant part of that trip, but we were able to point, and Tim Nichols was making this point, that New South Wales was winning the economic State of Origin, and they could see the difference between the economic management of the Queensland state government, which had just delivered a budget which had ram-rated effectively their future fund, and in New South Wales there are bulldozers and earth movers building roads.
But nonetheless, there are people who are not happy with some of the ways in which Mike Baird is doing this. There's a local row about trees being cut down for a light rail, and there's the WestConnex project. Do you think that those issues will actually come into play?
I think WestConnex has actually been a very big issue. And I think it's opened up a pretty big schism in the Labor Party because, I mean, in the inner parts of Sydney, I could see the advantage of why Anthony would want to be saying what he was saying about the WestConnex, by wanting to walk away from it. But out in Western Sydney, I mean, this is a big Western Sydney project, and our candidates were right to say, if you don't support WestConnex, you don't support Western Sydney. And so those issues did become relevant, and obviously we're putting billions into that project, and there were real questions. And in the last week of the campaign, it was shown that Mark Buckler had frustrated an approval in the caretaker period, which would have enabled that project to go ahead in its second phase.
You do know we're almost through the election campaign.
No, I know, but Penny, I was asked about whether WestConnex would have it
Australia about the WestConnex.
I think it has an impact.
Well, he sent, I think Greg Hunt sent many thousands of pages over to Mark Butler in the course of an election campaign demanding that he sign up to it. Then you dropped to the media that we were frustrating it because that wasn't at all a stunt, was it? Not at all.
But Penny,
I mean, let's be real. That is obviously a politically controversial issue.
True.
It was a politically controversial issue in the state election as well.
Anthony Green's got some more numbers for us.
Yes. Seat of Lyons in central Tasmania, we're currently seeing quite a large swing going on there. The Liberal vote there, and on 42.4 for Eric Hutchinson. This is a seat that's only had 3 members in 70 years till Dick Adams lost at the last election. So Eric Hutchinson, this is a seat with a bit of inertia behind it, but it is a seat which has generally been in Labor hands and has been there for a long time. The swing we're seeing on those figures is about 4.3%. So that sort of just puts Labor ahead at this stage, but again, they are very early figures. The next seat is Murray, which is a bit different because it's a national Liberal contest. This is where Sharman Stone is retiring. And Damien Drum is a former coach of the Fremantle AFL club, which is always something one has to live with. They haven't always been very successful for their coaches over the years, but he's well ahead at this stage. But these will be the smaller rural boos. There's a lot of Shepparton and Echuca and those sorts of places to come yet. But that's just a hint of that. And another person who's up there at this time, Bob Katter, on 40% of the vote up against the LNP. And there's a very good vote coming in from Kennedy at this stage, very small rural boos. And it seems to be boosting the overall other vote in Queensland at this stage. But at this stage, it's not turning into anything in particular. And I'll just do one other thing if I just get back to my, I won't. I'll do, what'll I do? I'm trying to show the home. My fault, sorry. Primary vote. I'm just showing the overall primary vote we're seeing at this moment. And we're seeing 41% for the Coalition, 34% for Labor, 10% for the Greens. There's 14% for other there. That wasn't a technical fault, that was entirely my fault. That didn't happen now. Just sort of clear that up. That's sort of, I'm trying to do several things at once.
Wow. There's
the big difference. It's the decline of the Palmer United vote, which is the big change in this election. How much of that will end up there by the end of the night? There's a bit of a drop in there, 3.7% down for the Coalition on the first preference vote. Overall, that's translating into a swing of about 1.5% at this stage. But as I said, that's only 0.2% counted. We're not calling it yet.
We'll forgive that one error, Anthony, but that's the last one, I'm afraid.
Anthony, on behalf of the panel, can I just thank you for allowing us to all have your software this year? It's so fabulous. I'm just sitting here fiddling with your marvellous software.
I think we keep getting distracted.
Even the guests. It's good gear. Like crack addicts.
Yeah, you talk amongst yourselves. We're just going to watch this.
That's very distracting. Penny and Scott, are you getting anything sort of old school results-wise? I know it's very, very hard to compete with Anthony.
Your iPhones?
Your scrutineers.
You go first.
No, not yet. Not
Okay.
yet. Look, it's still anecdotal, and there'll still be scrutineering very early things that are going across the table. So I think it'll be a little while yet before we get those sorts of things.
Okay. Scott, I wanted to ask you about something that was raised earlier by Barry, who said that he had a Liberal contact call him today and wanted to make the point that superannuation, he thought, as an issue, had hurt the Liberals, and it had hurt in terms of things like volunteers turning out to help hand out how-to-vote cards and that sort of thing. Now, I remember early in the campaign, people were talking about this issue quite a bit within the party, and then it disappeared. But Barry's point was that there are some people who think that it has been a bit of a problem.
Well, look, no, certainly not electorally, I don't believe, and that's certainly what we're showing through our research all the way through the campaign. The decisions that we made in the budget did impact on a very small proportion of the Australian population and a very small proportion of superannuants. And I think that the 8-week campaign gave us time, I think, to talk through a lot of those issues, and I certainly had quite a number of opportunities to talk through some of those issues with people over the course of the campaign. And look, there was a fellow who came up to me on a booth today, and he said, I wasn't terribly happy about that, but he said he was going to vote for me. Because he, believed that was the right thing to do for the country. So, they'll be looking to see, the next phase. We'll take it through the Parliament.
So you think people were disgruntled, but it didn't change their vote?
I think that's largely right. That's not to say people at first, when there wasn't the opportunity. Normally when you're making a big change like that, you would normally have done a public advertising campaign to explain a lot of these changes. Now, in the course of going into an election campaign, I would have been surprised if the Labor Party hadn't jumped all over us if we'd sought to do that in an election campaign, and we didn't do that. But over the 8 weeks, I think all of our candidates and our members had the opportunity to talk those issues through. Now, did a couple of people perhaps not turn up and work on a booth today? Probably. But are they the right changes for Australia and we should do them? Yes.
Penny Wong, something that people have reported to me on both the Labor and Liberal sides is that it's interesting that the Rudd and Gillard years and the sort of tension about that people have sort of moved on from it already, and including, senior coalition people have said to me there was just no mileage to be really had in talking about that. Why is it that that's so quickly vanished from the radar?
Well, I think, we all had to make a very clear decision after the last election, and one of the clear decisions the party had to make collectively was to acknowledge what both of those leaders contributed. I mean, for example, whether it's on climate or Gonski, very important contributions, but ultimately we had to learn a very important lesson that the electorate had reminded us most comprehensively about, and that was unity, and I think we've demonstrated that. And this has been an extraordinarily unified campaign. I'd also say, we're here talking tonight about what the result might be, and we're absolutely still in the contest. 3 years ago, I would have thought a lot of people were saying it would be a generation. Labor wouldn't be back for a generation, and here we are in a contest, and that is, a testament to Bill and Tanya and all of the team, to the whole of the Parliamentary Labor Party, but also to our members and supporters who've run a fantastic campaign.
Well, Scott Morrison might have put also that perhaps it's an indictment on the coalition government that you find yourselves in this position off the back of a government that was pretty solidly thumped out of office.
They said that about John Howard in 1998, and he went on to be Australia's second longest serving Prime Minister, and in many people's view, our best.
Yeah, but they didn't execute a Prime Minister in 2 years between 96 and 98.
Well, in fact, they actually fell to less than half of the two-party preferred vote in 1998, and they had a very difficult election in 1998. Now, as I said at the start of tonight's program, when Penny and I came on, first-term governments historically face a swing against them, and they do lose seats. They also, history tells us, tend to survive that first election as well. And I think tonight, it's certainly my hope, but I think that what I've picked up on the ground and over the course of the next 8 weeks, I think that's where we'll end up tonight. But the degree to which that occurs, we'll see as the night unfolds.
Can I just say, going to some of the old school stuff that we were talking about, the Labor Party is very excited about Eden Monaro and worried about Greenway. So some more news out of Eden Monaro, a 5.8% swing to Labor with 7 rural booths counted. That's fewer than 1,500 votes though, but places like Micalago, Captain's Flat and the like. Greenway, Pendle Hill, 5.9 swing to Labor. So they were concerned, it's very, very early figures, but they're keeping a close eye on Greenway. They were worried about that. Eden Monaro, they believe they're in with a big show.
One thing about the campaign that I'm really fascinated by, just harking back to what we were talking about a moment ago, if I can if I can break into Scott Morrison's attention while he just absolutely rolls around in the data.
We'll take that program off you.
State director coming out and
I know. Welcome to the Anthony Green love machine.
This might not have been the best idea.
No, take your toys away from them.
It's like 2 kids with iPads.
Is he actually just doing Candy Crush or something?
Yeah,
no, he's not.
Penny can check. And Sharks haven't started, so I'm not watching that on.
Yeah, he's doing something
network.
crush. I just don't know what he's crushing. Listen, one thing that fascinates me about this campaign, right, was in 2010 when Julia Gillard, in her first campaign as Prime Minister, took on that electoral task. She was hunted uphill and down dale about what she'd done to Kevin Rudd, and her displacement of him was a constant theme during that campaign. But you don't really see that hanging around Malcolm Turnbull's neck as heavily as it did around hers. Why is that, do you think, Scott Morrison?
People understood the change.
Why? Because they didn't like Tony Abbott as much as they like Kevin Rudd.
People understood the change. I mean, there'd been a vote early in February. There'd been a vote early in February, and then there was a vote later in the year. It didn't happen in the sort of shocked style way that I mean, I'm not making a comment on it, Penny. It's just that happened on that night, one night in the middle of June, and bang, Kevin was gone. And I think that people were quite bemused by all of that. Now, I'm not saying that it hasn't taken some time. I think particularly for coalition supporters and Liberal supporters to get over the events of last September and process them, that has been a painful process. But I don't think in the broader community there was a puzzlement about what had gone on.
Okay,
do you think that Tony Abbott's been better behaved than Kevin Rudd?
Oh, I think Tony's been, a great member of the government campaigning for the re-election of Malcolm Turnbull.
Okay, so looking at a few more New South Wales seats, and obviously this is where the 50-50 contests are, and it's still very early days. Macarthur, the Blair Mountain Gregory Hills booth, 10% swing to Labor. Right. Dobell, Erina Heights, both 5% swing to Labor.
Interesting. Scott Morrison, people say, and I think Malcolm Turnbull in fact said this week, that things would have been worse if they hadn't. What was it that he said on your show, Annabelle, about if they had left Tony Abbott there? There was something that Malcolm Turnbull said on your program that, it had to be done, but they'd be in a worse position now.
I can't remember. It was a gripping program. Sorry, I was so addicted to this that I didn't hear the first bit of your remark. Now, that's unkind. I'm just addicted to the data. Now, he said something on my program.
Yeah, I know, sorry for my lack of clarity as well. When you were interviewing Malcolm Turnbull, you asked him something about having changed from Tony Abbott, and he said something back. No, I'm joking. He said something like, we would have been in a worse position. Can you remember specifically what it was?
Yeah, no, still, I'm still... give me some thinking time.
All right.
They certainly backgrounded, I think, the day of the launch, wasn't it? That the result would have been much worse under Tony Abbott.
Well, all I was
Well, a
trying
newspaper
to...
did their own polling.
I was trying to use that to say to Scott, there are people who make the argument that things would have been worse if Malcolm hadn't taken over from Tony, and so it had to be done. But I'm just wondering, is tonight in some ways going to be a judgment on whether that was in fact the right thing to do?
Well, I suppose in many respects it will. As I've moved around the country, I haven't seen the ability for Labor to run a campaign against Malcolm Turnbull, which is based on their dislike of Malcolm Turnbull.
Anthony, some more results.
Yes, Eden Monaro. Everyone always wants to talk about Eden Monaro. They're the raw figures we're seeing at the moment. We have a preference count in 6 polling places, and they roughly correspond to what Chris was saying.
That's right.
We're seeing a 6.2% occurring in that election. Have a look at the change in first preference vote there. There's not much change in the first preference vote, but it's sort of, there's a... Well, I shouldn't look at that fact. This is more meaningful. Yep. What the votes they're getting is translating into 6.2% swing in that electorate. So, again, that's 1.7%. We don't call a seat on that lower count, but they are very encouraging first figures for the Labor candidate and discouraging for the Liberal candidate. Corangamite, this is the opposite way around. Sarah Henderson is well ahead in these figures. We've got preference counts in 2 of the smaller polling places. She's well ahead there on first preferences, and we're seeing only a small swing to Labor on the polling places we've received so far in that electorate. Now, Richmond, now what's going on here is Richmond has got lots of alternative lifestyle communities and areas at the back of Byron Bay and the like. And what you're seeing is some of them reporting. And the Greens are currently first, the Nationals second, and Labor third. There is a question in this electorate who will finish second, Labor or the Greens. I would expect the Nationals to lead on first preferences. This is an electorate, includes 2 state electorates, Tweed, which is a safe national seat, and Ballina, which was won by the Greens at the last state election. So there's 2 quite distinct ends. You need to know where the information is from. So that is an encouraging first figure for the Greens, but you really need to know where the figures are from. And I got one other figure here from Griffith, and this is quite dramatic. This is the Balmoral booth and a joint booth from Holland Park West, and the swing that's in those 2 polling places is 7.3 at this stage. Again, way too early to call, but we're seeing some quite variable swings.
And this was something that the Labor Party was talking about out of Queensland, that if things go badly for the Labor Party in Queensland, it would be not just not picking up seats, but they'd start to worry about seats like Griffith and Lilly. So 2 to keep an eye on.
I just wanted to return to Tony Abbott for a second, Scott, because Chris said earlier... I do indeed. Chris said earlier that the Liberal Party had started putting some resources into Warringah on Monday. One of your safest seats, one would assume.
Yeah, there was a letter was put into the electorate from Malcolm, who was very popular in that electorate, and also there were robocalls that went into that seat over the course of this week.
Is that a bit awkward?
No, when people like someone, they like to get a letter from them, and they like to get a call from them.
What's going on that you need to do that in Warringah?
Well, we'll see as the night progresses, but you put the resources where you need to put them.
No, but I just want to know what. Sorry to keep going on, but I just want to know what is the. Is it to do with? Chris was saying it maybe is to do with preference flows, but is there any sort of blowback that Tony didn't resign, or what's the?
No, I don't. I wouldn't read it like that. I'm not privy to all the information that was behind the decision. Only to know that yes, there was some support put into that seat over the course of the last week.
I just see Penny Wong has got some information through.
Oh well, just to say on Eden Monaro, I think we've got a couple more booths for our scrutineers than Anthony's got, and is correlating with the swing that he suggested, which was around 6%. I've got some small booths in, some early figures for Macarthur and Barton. Obviously Barton is notionally ours, but we've still got to win it. Labor primary looks like it's up there on 2013, which is a good result, and similarly Macarthur also Labor primary up there in the first couple of thousand. So
the other thing
very early results.
Yeah, it's true. We're getting positives out of Latrobe and Deakin, which. For Jason Wood and Michael Suker, I mean, they've run very good ground campaigns in Victoria, and we were expecting to see good results in both of those seats. And I should stress with Latrobe, because I was in Latrobe and Deakin quite a bit, and before the CFA issue broke in Victoria, and they are already, we thought, in a good, strong position.
You're coming up with a low base in Victoria, though. You would expect the Liberal Party should be making up ground there, and if you pick the right candidate in McEwen, you may well win that one.
Well, we'll see what happens in McEwen, but I think the issue that has really driven there, but in seats like Bendigo and potentially in seats like Indi as well, we'll
there
see.
Seems to be quite a bit of movement in Bendigo. Obviously, you have to remember all the time that there are wildly differing
Mine's broken,
booths.
by the way.
No! Bendigo, well, I mean, there seems to be quite a strong swing towards the Libs, but it's you have to be careful with that because it's a very mixed sort of a seat. But it's certainly one that the ALP is concerned about. Am I right?
Yeah, look, the thing was, again, in Victoria, it depends. Bad day, good day scenarios that people were going through because some of these things were too hard to call. But certainly in Victoria, if things are going badly, then you'd stop looking at Corangamite and Dunkley, obviously, and start looking at seats like Chisholm and Bruce, and maybe even Bendigo.
Well, look, when you go across all the marginals that are in play tonight, and you just work the probabilities on those, Labor basically has to have all of these fall their way. All of them have to fall their way for them to be in a position to form a government, even with the Greens and Independents, which they say they won't do. So that is a pretty high probability for them to be going that way. And if you start going backwards in a few, like whether it's in Bendigo or whether it's in other places, or where if you're in trouble in Werra, or we'll see what happens in Greenway a little later in the night, or even Parramatta, well, that makes life a lot harder.
I had some stats given to me just before we came on air, which was that 2.98 million people had done a pre-poll and more than 1 million people had done a postal vote, so about 4 million people have voted early. What do you think that means, Scott Morrison?
Well, first of all, and Anthony will correct me if I'm wrong here, but we're counting pre-poll. We count pre-poll on the night, and so we will see those figures reflected in the decision. But when you're looking at things like exit polls, for example, exit polls don't take into account what has happened over pre-poll, and postals will be obviously counted later. And so you've got to add that to whatever you're seeing the trend of tonight being. But of course, with pre-poll now running over such a long period of time, I mean, a lot happened in that last 3 weeks. Now, my view is a bit of the averages washes out. I mean, there's a bit of that goes in the course of the campaign. So you might have been up one day, you might have been down another day, but overall, it may not have an impact. We tend to, on our side of politics, tend to do a bit better on pre-poll than the Labor Party. The reasons for that are not entirely known. I mean, it could be we both man pre-polls.
Is that right, Penny?
Well, certainly they do a lot better on postals generally, which would make sense. I think it often will reflect where the campaign is, I suspect. So where a party is at that point in the campaign.
It's true.
So you'll get a different swing. I wonder if I've got some stuff, some information on Bass, but I think Anthony has too, which looks interesting.
Yeah, Anthony's got some Tasmanian numbers, so let's go there.
Yes, let's see the Bass. These are 827.49. We've got polling place figures. I can't see the numbers here, but we're at this stage factoring in a swing of 6. Oh, that's looks a bit ridiculous. I suspect I've just got a preference count for one booth there, so I'll just move. I'll just go back to the candy bars on that. What we're seeing there is some sort of swing there at this stage. It's not the sort of swing you could call the seat on. In Braddon, Brett Whiteley is well ahead, and Justine Key there on 31.6. Let's see what the swing figure is on this, 5.6%. Right. So we're seeing swings like that in parts of Tasmania, but the only seat within that range would be Lyons. So at this stage, which is the next seat on our list, this is a vast electorate. It covers all parts of Tasmania, and you need to know where each of the polling places is from. This is currently showing a swing of 2.8%, which would just tilt it into the Labor side of the pendulum. We've got 13% counted. We're predicting the Labor Party ahead. That's the first time we've published a prediction yet tonight. At this stage, we're not prepared to call that. Gilmore, we're seeing some early figures from Gilmore, quite substantial vote there. They're showing the Labor Party ahead on first preferences with the Liberals there. We know where that information is from in terms of polling places. At this stage, there's a 3.2% swing. It's not prepared to call it at this stage. It's still got the Liberal Party just ahead. But that was a seat where there was some talk, and certainly Bill Shorten went there sometime in the last week. In Page, we're now seeing more substantial figures. We've got 11% counted. We've got a number of polling places in with two-party preferred. We're seeing a swing of 0.5%. Now, that figure has gone up and down. The swing does seem to be variable from polling place to polling place. But we're starting to see some overall figures appear now. And I'll just say one thing. I'll just go back and look at that primary vote we're seeing. they're the national figures again, and the change in vote that's occurring at the moment is, again, that drop in the Liberal Party vote, the Palmer United vote down, and a bit of a rise in the other parties. Again, a big significant vote for the others. A lot of rural birds there. And I'll do one more thing. I'll just look at some swings around the country. At the moment, in New South Wales, we're seeing overall a swing of 1.9% to Labor. In Victoria, we're seeing no swing. And overall in Queensland, we're seeing 0.7 to the LNP. So there's nothing there which is indicating an overall national figure. We're seeing a bit of bouncing around from seat to seat. So there's no national trend appearing yet, but there are some differences from seat to seat.
Can I just point out too that news out of Queensland that Pauline Hanson, at least in the seat of Blair, is polling quite well.
Scott Morrison?
I was just going to say, I mean, it would be surprising if there wasn't a swing against the government tonight. I mean, that would defy all the historical trends. And I mean, for us, we go back to 1998. Now, in 1998, there was an average swing of 4.6%, or thereabouts, in that election. But in the seats that mattered, less than 6%, the average swing was only 3%, or just that. So we will see these sort of broader figures tonight, but what will matter at the end of the day is, will those swings be enough in each of those tight contests? And I think there will be many, many tight contests tonight, and it'll take some time.
So what you're saying is we're going to be picking through a lot of individual seats, which means you're all going to be glued like this to your laptops, picking them all
I just
apart.
want you to know I managed to fix my computer on my own.
It does look like a bit of movement in Tasmania, though, doesn't it?
Sorry?
It does look like there's some movement happening in Tasmania, doesn't it, at this stage?
We've also had some large booths come in Macarthur, and they look promising early. I don't know what Anthony has on his, but we're seeing a swing to Labor in the booths so far, and a reasonable number of votes counted.
Penny Wong, Barnaby Joyce has been on another network and has said that Bill Shorten ran his campaign, on an outrageous lie. I presume he's referring to the Medicare campaign.
This is the man who talked about $100 roasts. And is that right? Just checking.
It is Barnaby
Okay,
Joyce,
good.
correct.
Okay, so just so we're clear.
Let's go to his broader point, though. Were you comfortable?
You didn't promise that you were going to sell the Harbour Bridge or something.
Were you
which is
yourself
like the Medicare
comfortable
thing.
with this idea that was put out there that the choice today was between Malcolm or Medicare?
Oh, look, I think it is unarguable that this government is bad, that the Liberal government is bad for Medicare. It is unarguable that they are doing damage to Medicare. I think that is unarguable.
But was it a reach, though, to posit it as if it was the privatisation of Medicare, which is, a liability, who would want to buy Medicare, and also that it was so extreme that it was Malcolm versus Medicare?
I think it is really beyond argument that the policies of the coalition are damaging and detrimental to Medicare. I mean, if you freeze the rebate for 6 years, what will happen is not 6 years. What will happen is what the general practitioners say will happen, which is there will be a co-payment, which is the same agenda as Scott and his colleagues tried to implement in 2014, which is a GP tax. You're just doing it via other means.
Well, I'm not proposing to relitigate the election tonight, Penny.
I'm just responding to a question. I'm sure you'll be allowed to respond after that, because she's very balanced, right? It's unarguable that they're putting up the cost of prescriptions, and it's unarguable that they're going to make the costs of X-rays and other tests more expensive through the removal of the bulk billing incentives. Now, you might want to have an argument about nomenclature, about words. I think out there people understand which party is supportive and protective of Medicare and which party has been prepared to risk it and damage it.
Is that, Scott Morrison, not a reasonable conclusion for voters to make when you put together those things Penny's listed, particularly also because you're a free market government, and so therefore wouldn't it be logical that you would want to privatise, I'm not saying all of Medicare, but as much or bits that you could, that would fit with the natural ideology of your government?
We're not privatising Medicare. We were never privatising Medicare, and this was the problem with Labor's campaign. Labor went out with a massive overreach saying that the coalition was going to privatise Medicare. And I think Australians they just called it. As Graham Richardson said, they'll find you out. And they found Bill out on this one. And it was such a massive reach. And Lee, you exposed that yourself in your own interviews with the Leader of the Opposition over the course of the campaign. Now, all of the issues that Penny says are inarguable actually are very arguable. And we are ensuring that a more sustainable Medicare for the future. And the fact that bulk billing rates are at record levels then, well, you know, I think the results speak for itself that we're a government that actually has supported Medicare. But look, the political point is one that Labor's campaign was based on a massive overreach, or to put it more bluntly, a great big fat lie, and he got called out on it.
It is 7 o'clock in the east, a couple of hours behind in the west. Anthony Green has some more early results for us.
Yes, we've got some figures for Macarthur. Now, we don't have a two-party preferred here, but I can look at the change in vote, and the percentages that are showed here are corrected for where it's from.
Right.
And there is a drop in the Liberal vote and a rise in the Labor vote. There's Xenophon team candidates getting 3.9% there. So that is translating into a swing towards Labor. We don't have a two-party preferred swing occurring in that electorate, but that shows you there is a swing on there. In Robertson at this stage, and we've got some polling places, the Liberal vote's well ahead. And when we look at the two-party preferred swing, there's a 3% swing to Labor, which puts that seat line ball. So a lot more counting to come in Robertson. That's one of those seats that we've got in doubt at this stage. And then in Dobell, what we have is, this is a seat, the asterisk up here means it's changed because of the redistribution. This is a notional Labor seat. And at the moment, the Liberals are ahead, but there appears to be a swing to Labor. And as that seat is still notionally Labor, that is a good result for the Labor Party. But that is one that's actually currently factored in as on the Labor side of the pendulum. And I just want to do one more thing, because I was just looking at some state trends there. I'll bring up the primary vote, and then I have to select a state. So if we go to look at Queensland, what we're seeing in Queensland is a big vote for other. And if you look at the change in vote that's occurring, Palmer votes down and it's all gone over to other. At this stage, there's a number of electorates where Pauline Hanson's One Nation is polling 10 and 15%. And of course, you've got Bob Katter's party in North Queensland that's doing quite well. Much of that is occurring in outside of southeast Queensland. It's about 12% in southeast Queensland and about 24% across the rest of regional Queensland.
So I've just got some scrutiny accounts out of Braddon. 17 booths counted, Liberal primary down by about 5%, Labor primary up by about 2.2. I don't have an accurate two-party preferred, but obviously that's a very encouraging result, and well done to the Tasmanian campaign.
That looks like 3 seats at Braddon, Bass and Lyons that look optimistic
Promising
for you.
Good
at this
early
stage.
signs, but I agree with Anthony. You know, it's early days and smaller booths, etc. But they are promising figures.
And more out of Eden Monero from the Labor Party. A two-party preferred 51.3 to ALP with 4.35% counted. Gilmore, 18 booths in now, 9.5% counted, 3.14% swing to Labor on two-party preferred.
For our politicians, when you see something like, the 10% that went to the Palmer United Party go straight to other, basically, I mean, that's got to be worrying for you about how people feel about, the major parties.
Well, I think we've been seeing this for some time. I mean, you saw it in the last election, as you said, with Palmer, and how much of that settles there over the course of the whole count, and how much of it drifts back to the major parties and preferences. We'll just have to wait and see. I mean, I don't find that terribly surprising. That's why we were stressing throughout the course of the campaign that, if you vote for chaos, you'll get it.
But the Palmer United Party 3 years ago was sending people personalised CDs, and it was an organised outfit. It was recognisable with a centralised message, right?
Yeah.
But the fact that voters are with no longer a Palmer United Party there to vote for, just basically scattering their votes among the chickens that they find locally is not a very prepossessing outcome, is it, for major parties?
Look, the world is an uncertain place and it's highly volatile, and Malcolm talked in the campaign, as I did as well, about there is a tendency for some people to maybe want to pull the doona over the head and hope all this goes away. Well, it's not going away, and it does need us to deal with these very difficult issues fairly directly, and that's what we've put out there over the course of this campaign to sort of we get it that this reality we have to deal with in the world economically and more broadly is very serious, and we have to confront it. That does require change. People don't necessarily like change, whether it's at a large level or particularly if it involves a personal change. But the truth is, our economy is transitioning. That does mean change, and people will often resist it. And that may be what we're seeing in some of those those votes staying with independents who are saying, "Oh, it's all okay. You can pull the doona over your head." Well, the truth is, you can't.
But see, you guys framed that message a little bit differently in the campaign, which was that the Prime Minister would always say, it's never been a more exciting time, and he had a very positive framing around what you just said. You just acknowledged there that actually makes people quite anxious. I'm just wondering, was the message about it's an exciting time something that perhaps alienated people a little?
No, I think it made it accessible, and it showed as a Prime Minister that there is hope on the other side. Yes, there are all these uncertainties, but we can get to the other side, and we have a plan to get there. So I think that is exactly the way to take the country forward, to deal with what is uncertainty. But what you can't do, well, let me rephrase that. What you shouldn't do, but others seem to do, is say, you can just ignore all of that and you won't have to face any consequences for ignoring all that. There are very real consequences if we don't continue to deal with these issues, and they don't just affect our generation, they affect future generations as well.
And Penny Wong, I'll come to you, and you hold that thought, and I'll come to you on this point in a moment. But first we're just going to go over to Michael Rowland, who's going to give us a summary of the big picture state of play at the moment.
Yes, good evening again, Lee. I'm high above you, making all sorts of creative use of the ABC's Cavernous Ultimo Centre, including some Schmidt graphics like these. We're going to show you the state of play in the 45th Parliament at the moment. And there you see the coalition on 52 seats, Labor Party holding 38. Greens yet to claim a seat, so yet to formally be re-elected in the form of Adam Bant in the seat of Melbourne, and Independents at this stage holding 3 seats. Okay, let's flick over now to the primary vote as it stands, and 42% to the coalition, the Labor Party on 35%, the Greens on 10.6%, a slight improvement on their 2013 primary vote, and others on 12%. Keep note of those 2 bottom bar charts, because that shows about 22% of Australian electors going for either the Greens or Independents, which could prove very important a bit later on. Let's show you now how the primary vote is going up and down over the course of the night. A fall of 3.4% for the coalition, a rise of 1.2% for the Labor Party. The Greens at 2.1% and others virtually unchanged. And that extrapolated on a 2-party preferred basis has the ALP with a 1.1% swing, and the Liberal National Party still ahead, firmly in 2-party preferred terms, 52 to 47. Let's swing around now to transpose ourselves to the virtual House of Representatives chamber on this ABC's shiny disco floor. I'm feeling very much like John Travolta tonight. The House of Representatives is looking like this. It is early days yet, but we are gradually seeing the Parliament fill up, with those blue seats representing seats won by Liberal and National Party MPs or candidates. 52 to the coalition on the other side of the chamber, 38 to Labor, going to the Labor Party. None yet from the Greens, as we mentioned, and right here at the back, so far, 3 to the crossbenchers. But we do stress it is early days yet, but the shape of the next Parliament, in very stunning visual terms, Lee, is starting to take shape.
Thanks very much, Michael. We'll look forward to seeing your Saturday night fever moves a little bit later in the evening. Penny Wong, just to pick up what we were talking about with Scott Morrison and the PUP vote just going straight across to other. Scott said that, people come and go from major parties and whatnot, but say in your state, South Australia, if Nick Xenophon polls 27% of the primary vote and Labor's polling 28% of the primary vote, that starts to become an existential threat for the Labor Party in South Australia.
Well, we're actually doing better on the news, on the published polls to date on the 2-party preferred than we did in 2013. But you're right, whether it's Nick or Palmer United or Pauline Hanson or another party, we do need to think through why is it that people are turning in those sorts of numbers to a third party. I think there is at a macro level, this is a time of change, and I think that it is easy in a time where people feel insecure and concerned for people who provide easy answers and get a lot of attention for their easy answers to become more popular. So I think that's almost inevitable. I think there's a lesson to, if you look at the US and Britain, about making sure we work to create a less unequal society. I think that is demonstrably an issue. I think with Nick and his team, we have to remember over this term South Australians have witnessed a lot of broken promises promises and from the Liberal Party. So the submarines, they promised, which people walked away from, they eventually kept. We saw Joe Hockey goading Holdens to leave, and this is all on top of a very substantial and fast economic transition. So it is unsurprising that as a result of that backdrop of uncertainty from the Liberals' behaviour in government this term, that the easy answers that Nick and others provide sound good. I would say, of course, there is no such thing as an easy answer. And that's a hard message.
Your government broke promises to South Australia too on submarines.
Is there a larger point on?
No, I don't think that's true.
Well, you delayed things.
We whatever your view about procurement
without a decision.
Without a decision, having had the yards full from work on the LHDs and the air warfare destroyers. So the yards were full under us; they weren't full under them. But I'm making a different point. I wasn't actually just trying to make a partisan point. I think there is undeniably in South Australia there's a real concern. Nick's been able to respond to that. What I would say is I don't think in politics, in government, there's any easy answer, and that's the challenge for parties in government.
Isn't there a larger question for both of you on this, is that there are a large group of people in society who don't believe that the direction in which you're heading is actually helping them. We saw the same thing in Brexit in the UK. We're seeing the same thing in the United States, as people are happy to break the system because they don't believe the system is working for them. And that's globalising the economy. That's our free trade agreements. They believe, whether they're right or not, that jobs are going overseas. They can see their own living standards declining. Isn't that a problem in the long term for you, Scott Morrison, if people actually think that's what's happening?
It's a political problem for major parties who go to elections with the view to forming governments and running things. It's not a problem for minor parties that never have to form a government, never have to make a decision, and can tell people whatever they would like to hear and say that can all go away. Now, we may be on a common platform on this issue. I mean, we may disagree about any number of things, but the Labor Party has run a campaign on the basis of forming a government and making a bunch of decisions.
Things, actually. But that's okay.
We've done the same thing. But, we have to, the alternative, Chris, is that you would see an increased populism in Australian politics. And I think a real undermining of sensible policy
Just something
to run the country.
Coming through now, Macquarie, a primary swing to Labor of 4%. Coalition's primary vote down 7.5% with 7 booths counted.
Anthony, have you got anything more for us at the moment?
I'll just say that on Macquarie, 7 booths is a 5.9% swing. We've got a couple of seats here. New England, now, because the counting national versus independent this time, we don't have access to the polling place historical information. At this stage, Barnaby Joyce is well ahead. We don't know where that information is from, but that's with 7% counted. I presume that's the rural areas. We haven't got a lot of Tamworth and Armidales would be my assumption there, and that would be where you would expect Tony Windsor to do better. So we'll have to wait and see for some later figures there, but that would be encouraging for Barnaby Joyce there. Parramatta. What we're seeing, this is a Labor seat, a marginal Labor seat, and we're seeing a two-party preferred swing in that electorate to Labor of 6%, but it is a Labor-held electorate, and this is a low count at this stage. In Michelle Rowland, she's ahead on first preferences. I've got a two-party preferred swing there of 5%. Again, one of the difficulties about this stage of the night is we start to get preference counts in, and it's suddenly from 1 booth or 2 booth again, and that might be the same figure you had from earlier on, and so you get a bit of unreliable thing. What I will say is we're seeing, starting as we're getting polling electorates, and we've got some in Queensland, we're getting more consistent votes like Capricornia and Petrie. We're seeing not much swing occurring in the LNP holding, but I got 2 figures from Herbert showing an enormous swing. But I'm really a bit doubtful about whether that was a good comparison of polling places. So it's sort of looking a bit really quite erratic at first, and then it settles down when the figures, you get more and more polling places in the count.
Yep, absolutely. Thanks, Anthony. I just wanted to pick up on that discussion we were just having. You both were talking about people offering easy answers to things when there really are no easy answers. But you look back over Australian politics, and there have been times where governments have had to do difficult things and make the case to Australians to embrace policies that some people would find hurtful to their own personal interests for the national good. So
like
you look at
changing superannuation or changing the rate of company tax at a federal election.
No, I'm thinking about things
I'm
thinking about things like the floating of the dollar, and the lifting of tariffs in the 1980s, the imposition of the GST in the 1990s. What's changed that? People in those eras, I mean, I guess in the 90s we had Pauline Hanson's One Nation, but we had the Democrats before that. Are we witnessing the same sort of phenomenon, or is something different now?
I think it's probably different.
I always think that period after you saw the terms of trade just go like this in Australia, you suddenly had a period of government where sometimes the question was what to do with all of this company tax revenue. I mean, there was a situation that I'm sure you would love to have these days, Scott Morrison, where you could set up the Future Fund. You were puzzling over what to do with all of this excess revenue, right? But now, you can't buy your way out of situations. You can't buy political happiness among your electors. You have to make hard decisions that hurt people, right? And sometimes I feel like our politicians are kind of out of practice with that sort of thing.
Well, apparently not, given the criticisms that are made of
Well,
our side of politics.
You're horrendous,
when we
obviously, but I mean,
seek
everyone
to
else.
make these sorts of changes that are necessary for the sustainability of the budget and the sustainability and growth of the economy. One thing that
contestable,
one thing that I mean, you take what's happening in the United Kingdom, for example. I mean, in the United Kingdom, the global financial crisis really hit hard in the North Atlantic, and they had what was known in policy terms as a burning platform. Now, I'm not about to wish a burning platform on the Australian economy to have the sort of quick and major changes that people are more readily accepting of in those types of circumstances. I would like to avoid a burning platform, and that, I think, takes us into a period of incremental reform rather than some of the changes we've seen in other places. Now, even that, I mean, in the UK, government spending as a share of the economy is still higher than it is in Australia, despite the changes they've made to their own budget over the last few years since the GFC.
Can I just say that, just again from scrutineers in Gilmore, saying that 17% of the vote counted there, 5% swing to Labor on two-party preferred and 7% on primaries. Now, Gilmore wasn't one that they were talking about earlier in the day as being in their sights.
I'm just going to go to Penny Wong and then to Barry Cassidy. Penny, you had a point you were holding on to
yes.
there. Yeah.
I think, you were referencing a period, the Hawke-Keating government's opening up the economy essentially, and I think one of the points I would make about that is those things were very important economic reforms. I don't actually think a $50 billion unfunded tax cut is an economic reform, but let's leave that to one side for the moment. But don't forget, they were highly contested, but they were also associated with a whole range of reforms to the social safety net, to things like super, Medicare, a whole range of other benefits. And it comes back to the point I was making earlier. I do think we have to recognise that the changes in our economy that are being wrought by external factors do give rise to greater inequality. And as Jenny Macklin, I think, really cogently pointed out in the work she's done, that is an important problem for us to address. If we want to be able to continue down the path of sensible economic reform, you can't ignore inequality. And I think the difficulty is certainly a lot of people feel like this government has.
Is there the scope, though, with the current economic settings? You've sort of talked about almost, it's not a carrot and a stick approach, but you've certainly said you've undertaken reforms, but you've offered something in return. Is the way that our economy is performing at the moment, and when you take into account the external factors, is there actually the scope to offer many sweeteners to make economic reform more palatable?
Well, I certainly don't think you do it by with the risk of being, political, cutting into Medicare, defunding schools, and I don't think that, and offering a large tax cut to big business. I don't think that is a reform plan that Australians can say, yes, I see something, a national interest there for me.
Let me pull Barry Cassidy in. Barry, what are you hearing so far?
Well, for me, I think if you look at some of the what I call the low-hanging fruit around the country, you see seats like Petrie, Capricornia, Lyons, Braddon, Solomon, Eden Monaro. I wouldn't take too much notice when those seats fall, and I don't think the government would be too disturbed by that. A couple of things though. Gilmore, I think the fact that Gilmore is now starting to move in the way that it is interesting, and there could be a bit more action in New South Wales if that's going to be reflected elsewhere. And Tasmania, there are really big swings going on in Tasmania, and by the end of the night, all 5 seats in Tasmania could fall to the Labor Party. The primary vote, though, the primary vote for Labor, 35%, way too low to seriously challenge. And Queensland is really interesting, 30% primary vote. Now, at the last election, Labor recorded its worst primary vote in Queensland ever, and it was just under 30%. It's not much better this time. So what that tells you is Queenslanders are no more enamoured to the Labor Party now than they were during the Rudd and Gillard years.
Okay, stay there, Barry, because Scott. Stay there, Barry, because I'll come back to you in a sec. Anthony.
Tasmania is actually a bit of a story which has taken me a little bit by surprise. The Labor is ahead on first preferences, and you've got the Green vote there as well. If you look at the change in vote that's occurred, the Liberal vote down 5.4, the Labor vote up 4.3, the Green vote up. At the moment, I've got Labor getting 3 seats past Braddon and Lyons, which has not been something which has been discussed much. But at the moment, that's they're the 3 seats Labor is definitely gaining. I also have Labor gaining Macarthur. And I've got them ahead in Herbert, but I'm not exactly sure about that. So we're seeing a number of seats falling, but certainly Tasmania has turned out to be substantially different than the story that anyone was paying attention to. So at the moment, it may be that the Labor is gaining 3 seats in Tasmania. I've got a lot of preference counts in. Now, I'm relying on data from the Electoral Commission and their historical data. If that data is correct, then Labor's picked up 3 seats in Tasmania.
No one was really expecting that, were they? Really?
No.
What are the factors there, do you think?
Gilmore is a tight seat. And even though, I mean, it's had
we're
members.
talking about Tasmania.
I'm sorry. Well, I was picking up from the Gilmore conversation, but no, Tasmania. Those 3 seats were all held by the Labor Party before the last election. And the Labor Party have held virtually all of Tasmania for a very long period of time, and so their breakthrough at the last election was one of the key, I think, events of the last election. And they are hotly contested seats with a very strong Labor constituency.
I think that's they're very good early indications from Tasmania in all 3 seats. I mean, I think Lyons was probably the seat that the Tasmanians, thought might be the first one that could be a gain, but we're looking. It's very positive in Bass and Braddon so far on both the scrutineer numbers and also Anthony's.
Barry Cassidy, let me come to you. Can you tell us anything about what's going on in Batman and also any of those other seats in inner city Melbourne that the Greens were targeting?
No, I've got no other figures that would help you there, though Batman is clearly going to be a very tight contest.
We're getting some reports from Sabra Lane, our correspondent in Melbourne, that Labor people are saying that they think Batman's gone. Have you got anything on that, Penny Wong, at the moment?
Well, it's certainly a very tough seat for us. It's a seat where the Greens have really focused their campaign in Victoria, it's been a seat where there have been a few issues in the campaign, but let's see what happens on the vote. Certainly, David's worked very, very hard, and it's a seat that we really want to hold.
And Labor's saying that Linda Burney is going to pick up the seat of Barton.
Barry,
it's a redistributed seat to the Labor Party.
I know.
I'm not surprised by that result.
But they do have to win it.
We still have to win it, but it is notionally Labor.
Yeah, I mean, after the redistribution, I suspect we may have a swing to us in that seat. But what matters is who wins it.
Yeah. Anthony's keen to say something.
Just to say that if people are watching the seats 1 at the bottom, they may notice it occasionally slips down. We have a system in the system. If it's over beyond a certain level, it gives it away. But if it narrows again, it might fall back under the sort of giveaway algorithm, so it hops backwards and forwards. And sometimes that happens when we get a preference count. We start to get preference counts in. It's a rather complex mechanism. We could actually sort of be well behind and give them away manually, but you'd never give any seats away if you relied on scrutineers to say whether they'd won it or not. So we have an automatic mechanism. So I'll just explain why that's occurring. At the moment, they're relatively reliable figures for overall numbers, and certainly we're nowhere near the 76 that one side or other needs to win the election.
Anthony, just on the seat of Batman, how significant is it that the Greens candidate at this stage is ahead of David Feeney?
Well, it's only 2 tiny polling places, so I don't think it's significant.
Okay.
It's not very many figures. The seat of Flynn, which is one of those runs inland from Gladstone, is a mix of industry and agriculture. At the moment, Ken O'Dowd's first preference vote is quite low. You notice there, One Nation, 17.8%, so that's a huge vote for them. And I think we've got a fair number of preference counts in that electorate. There's a 3.1% swing, but at this stage we're predicting the LNP will retain that seat. Capricornia next door, Michelle Landry is on 8269, 40%, Lisa 36.7, 7.6 for Katter's Australian Party. When we look at the 2-party preferred swing that's occurring there, it's in doubt, not being given away at this stage, so it's only a small swing there. So we're seeing a bit of quite a variable swing. That's not not decided yet. When we look at Bonner, closer to Brisbane, we're seeing Ross Vasta, who's lost that seat over the years. Look at the 2-party preferred swing that's occurring there, only a small swing, and the LNP are ahead. We've got further counting to come in that electorate. In Brisbane, the central seat, the LNP are ahead on first preference. A big vote there for the Greens, 18%, so it's going to go down to preferences. We have a 2-party preferred swing of 0.9%, in which case the LNP would retain that seat. So there are seats which the Labor Party needs to win, which they're not winning, and there are seats which they're winning which weren't really counted in by everybody. So at this stage, the result is not clear. We're seeing a swing which would not defeat the government, but we're also seeing Labor winning seats. So at the moment, it's sort of leaning towards the government being re-elected, but certainly I want to see some of these seats a bit more preference counted.
What about and state-by-state differences?
I was going to say, what about seats like, I mean, I'm just looking at your figures here on Chisholm, on Adelaide, on Moreton, and that certainly what we're seeing on these figures, at least on Adelaide, is consistent with what we're seeing up in Brisbane, in some of the more inner city areas where we were anticipating we would do better at this election in a lot of those inner areas.
I broke away from my seat run, actually, I'm sorry. So I've got, I had a couple more seats after Brisbane. Petrie. The LNP is ahead, 39% for Labor's 8%. What we're seeing a two-party preferred swing there of 0.5 to the LNP, and that was one of the most marginal seats in the country. I think it's the most marginal coalition seat. And then the next seat we've got is Grey, which is the first of the South Australian seats, and Nick Xenophon's team is running second. We have no calculation of swing in that electorate. We won't get that count on the night, and of course this is a very diverse electorate.
There's a lot of
there's
a very lot of firefighting.
That's 10 first preference votes. And in Mayo, we've got Rebecca Sharkey ahead. This is only 3.4% counted. That's a bad first result, but again, we do not have information from where that's from in that election.
And can I just say, we've long since passed Queensland, but you look at the vote that Pauline Hanson is getting, and again, out of a seat like Blair, 14.4% vote for Pauline Hanson's One Nation Party.
The count's still going on around everywhere, obviously. We've got some pictures of it going on in the seat of Petrie that we were just talking about. Can you see anything on the floor, Anthony? Have they managed to pick those votes up?
Well, they've moved on to the Senate, so they've probably finished the House of Representatives in that election.
Right.
Polling place.
Barry Cassidy's still there. Barry, I'm not sure if you could hear the conversation we were having earlier, but we were talking about, looking in the context of Queensland, the flow of votes from the Palmer United Party. They'd all just gone straight across to other. We were talking about how Nick Xenophon's polling in South Australia. We were comparing it to the 80s and 90s and parties like the Democrats and One Nation and so on. And I asked Penny Wong and Scott Morrison, did they think what's going on now is just the same? It seems we've got a recency bias. It seems something different just because it's now. Penny Wong said she thinks it's different. What do you think?
With Queensland, I just
generally,
think
I think generally just the flow of people being attracted to other parties.
Yeah, well, it's growing all the time. I mean, the attraction to the minor parties and away from, it's running at about 22% or something, I think, in the last figures that I saw, away from the major parties. So that complicates things a bit, but I think when you see that primary vote of 35%, I think that's low enough to say that certainly Labor can't win this election, and it can't win it in its own right. But the interest then turns to whether or not the government can be returned with a majority or a minority. And because there are those 3 seats in Tasmania, and then Gilmore, if that's any indicator, it means that maybe 4 or 5 seats could fall in New South Wales. If that was to happen, and then you add seats like Solomon and Hindmarsh perhaps still to come, that would be potentially 9 or 10 for Labor without Western Australia. And then you've got the prospect of Xenophon and maybe a rogue seat somewhere or other. So potentially it could still be bumping up against that area of 14 seats or so that the government is trying to hold on to avoid slipping in a minority.
So Penny Wong, Barry Cassidy's saying that where Labor's primary vote is at the moment is a little bit ominous. What do you think?
Well, I mean, I think certainly we have to improve the primary vote from where it was at the last election. But remember, we had a very low primary vote at the last election, but our TPP, we lost government, but it was not as bad as you might have considered given where the primary was. So obviously that there are more third parties. You win seats unless unless it's not you in the last 2, you win seats on the two-party preferred. And for example, I mean, if a lot of the Nick Xenophon votes come back to us, or we get a good flow in Green or other preferences, that can be the key to many of our marginals.
Are you getting any word on what's going on in Longman? I know that Queensland's not going well for you on the whole, but it would appear that there is a bit of a swing against White Roy there.
That's right. Look, these are early numbers, so it's only I've only got less than 10 booths reported, but you're looking at a swing of in excess of 5% on primary votes on those booths. As I said, I don't know which booths they are, but that is an encouraging sign.
Anthony, can you give us a bit more insight into the Greens threat in Victoria?
Yes. These seats take longer to come in, partly because they're inner cities, so they're bigger polling places. Secondly, because I suspect there's a lot of scrutineering going on in this electorate. Labor vote's down to 40%. The Greens are on 28%. I think that's, if the Liberal preferences flow to Labor, that gap's too big. But I think there's a lot more counting to come on that. I think we do have a preference count which is 12% swing, but you've got to remember this is about 16 or 17% as a margin. So at this stage, that's got the Labor Party ahead, but that's a very poor first preference vote for David Feeney, so that's not a good result. But the Green vote needs to be closer to the Labor vote, and at this stage it's not, so there's more counting to come in that electorate. The next seat is Wills, and the Green candidate is ahead at this stage. Again, they're only 4% ahead. Remember, 70% of Liberal preferences flowed to Labor last time. So if it stays in that order, that's still a chance for Labor to win. And at this stage, I think, again, we've got a Labor-Green preferences swing at 20%. It's got the Greens ahead, but this is not an early enough call. And this is, you'd want to see more figures in that electorate, but it's interesting to watch. In Melbourne, Adam Bant is having little difficulty. He's on 45.9. And the two-party preferred, or two-candidate preferred swing there is 11.3% to the Green. Actually, just let me go back to the candy bars there. At this stage, the Liberals are in second place in that electorate. So that shows you how, no, a wait to see. There are a couple of pockets of quite strong Liberal votes in East Melbourne and in Docklands, so they may have come in. That might explain that. But if that occurs, then the Greens will win that seat even more easily. Higgins, this was the one there was a lot of interest in. The issue here is Kelly O'Dwyer's on 44.7 and the Greens are in second place. Now, I think that the preference flows between those two parties, between Green and Labor, are symmetrical. If Labor goes out, their preference flows to the Greens are at the same rate as if the Greens flow to Labor. We've got some two-party preferred figures, which is throwing a 3.6% swing to the Greens. I'm not, no, that's you'd have to wait. You need a bit more analysis.
Just on, before you go past that one, what I'm hearing from Higgins is that the Green vote there is a transference from the ALP vote to the Green vote, not a Lib vote to the Green vote. So there's some transference going on there, but at the moment, look, it's 13.5, but on those figers...
If there's a 4 in front of a number and you're a sitting member in a seat,
that's a good number to have.
Yeah, it's 5 is better.
Yes, it is, but we'll wait for that one later in the night.
With Cook, you'll see. And on to... no, I haven't got Petrie, I'm sorry, but that's some early figures we're seeing there. So we're starting to see some of those sorts of numbers in. And at the moment, what I'm seeing again, in terms of my overall figure, I'm seeing a swing of 2.5% at the moment. Which is not enough to change government. And I'm seeing, in terms of seats which are changing, where's my changing display? It's there. I'm seeing Labor picking up 6 seats at this stage. So there's a swing against the government. Labor is gaining seats, but at this stage there's nothing which is indicating a change of government. But I'm not calling it yet.
No. Which is pretty much what you would expect for a first-term government generally, to see a...
Governments lose some skin. First-term governments usually lose some skin. The question is how much skin this government loses. And it looks at the moment like the Queensland story is bad for the Labor Party, but the New South Wales story might be much better. And we'll have to wait a long time to find out. The news out of Banks for the Labor Party appears to be good, at least on primaries. And we'll have to wait. It looks like results, they say, not likely tonight in that seat.
There's some good news coming out of Chisholm. And Julie Banks was one of those candidates that Malcolm mentioned in his speech on Thursday. And Julie's run a very strong campaign down there in Chisholm, and the figures I have in front of me here, some 13.7% of the vote counted, and it leaning our way at just around 51% on 2PP. Now, what's important about this seat, and this is why Werra is, I haven't seen anything on Werra yet, but these are non-incumbent races. These are, you had Laurie Ferguson out in Werra, and you had Anna Burke, was a very popular member in Chisholm, and well known and highly regarded, and she was respected across the aisle too. Now Anna not being in that contest really does change the nature of that contest, and so far Julia's putting in a very good show.
Now, Eden Monaro is always a very hotly contested seat. We heard Anthony say earlier that it is a bellwether seat. It has gone with the government every year since 1972. We've got Mike Kelly standing by there, who is the Labor candidate. He's the former MP who held the seat from 2007 to 2013. We'll come to him in just a moment, but first, Chris and Anthony, can you take us through that seat?
Yeah, look, this is a seat that changed quite dramatically in the redistribution. One of the things that's going to be playing into a seat like Eden Eden Monero is the fact that there are those council amalgamations that were making quite a bit of difference. But also, I'm told by everyone, the thing that's making a difference here is a difference in the way that the two members are campaigning or have been campaigning. And Anthony, can you take us through Eden Monero?
Yes, we've got a substantial count. I've got a preference count in a quarter of the polling places at this stage. The margin's 2.9%. Peter Hendy up against Mike Kelly. Mike Kelly's the former member. It's a seat gained by the coalition at the last election. Peter Hendy is ahead on first preferences. Wait for the percentages to occur, but he's only just ahead. There's 8% there with the Greens. We're factoring in where those figures are from, and at this stage we're seeing a 4.7% swing, where at this stage we've got it as leaning heavily towards being a Labor gain. We've actually not quite given it away at this stage. Mike Kelly is ahead. He's been consistently ahead. I do remember last time there was a bit of variability from polling place to polling place in that electorate, but at this stage there are encouraging figures for Labor, but we're not giving it away.
Well, a very encouraged Mike Kelly, trying very hard not to smile at the Queanbeyan Leagues Club, is joining us now. Mike, welcome to the broadcast. I see from your stock of semi-inflated red balloons behind you that you are cautiously optimistic.
Yes, I guess you could say we're buoyant, but it is promising early on. The sort of results coming in from locations that are tough, and it really does reflect the fact that I think people have taken some of the new areas for granted. These are people actually that have quite open mind, and they're also, I think, over being taken for granted quite seriously in the Yass Valley in particular. So, we have worked really hard. We've had a fantastic campaign team that have just worked their guts out. So we feel we've left nothing in the dressing sheds, and we're confident, that we'll get a good result tonight.
Well, still early days, obviously, but it seems that you are doing better than the Labor Party is generally. If you win this seat and Labor is unable to form government, you will have broken one of the great shibboleths of Australian politics, which is that Eden Monero always goes with the government of the day. That'll be a bit of a mixed result for you, I imagine.
Oh, look, I'd prefer we kept that status, actually, because really what I'm in this business is for delivering the policies that we've spent so much work on in the last couple of years. And it really is a magnificent body of work. Just the 41-page document on a climate change action plan alone, which is so important for our region. We're one of the most vulnerable regions in Australia, with our billion-dollar skiing industry at stake, our coastal communities who are vulnerable, our fruit growers in the southwest slopes who really depend on reliable rainfall patterns, and the over $1 billion of renewable energy investment that came in here under Labor's previous policy, that just stopped stone dead, in 2013. So we really embrace that, and that good policy really needs to come back. And Gonski, of course, so important for rural and regional schools. And there's been a really solid campaign on Gonski here that has made such a good difference.
And Mike, what about council amalgamations? It was a big issue in that electorate.
Yeah, it's a diverse electorate, of course, and issues are played out differently in each location. But certainly these forced mergers have really caused a lot of grief in places like Tumbarumba and Bombala, and of course in Queanbeyan and Palorang as well. So there's a very strong feeling that they want to send a message. They don't feel that Peter Hendy really fought hard enough for them, whereas Barnaby Joyce and Anne Sudmelis and Susan Lee and others won reprieves. And that feeds back to another central theme of this campaign, which is I think the community really demands community-based representation. And I think the last couple of years have been extremely disappointing, and I think they're really wanting to send a message about the standard of representation that they demand.
Mike Kelly, are you suggesting that the result or the apparent result in this seat is more to do with an insufficiently hard-working local candidate than more broad campaign issues?
Well, they've all played a role, but there's no doubt, and it has to be said, that the sitting member has really been derelict in his duty. He was the only one of the 9 candidates in this election who was actually paid to turn up to debates, and he absolutely absconded from every single community-based debate, was nowhere to be seen. In fact, around the traps here, we've been referring to him as a unicorn. We've heard stories about him, but we're not sure he really exists. So And
Well,
it's
he
going
hasn't
to
been
come back
invited to
me.
your party tonight.
I tell you what, you've got a very easy crowd there, Mike.
He's there all night. Try the veal.
Yeah, he's welcome to come, you know. We'll certainly shout him a beer because we'd like to know what he thinks, you know.
Listen, I've got time for one more question. It's about the leadership change that happened in the government last year. What sort of a change did that make to your prospects, do you think, looking back?
Well, I guess that was the other factor that's played out is because of Peter's central role in the coup and the fact that it was hatched here in Queanbeyan and in his home. The base of his Liberal support really eroded dramatically because of that. And I cannot tell you the number of Liberal voters that have come up to me and said, look, we've never voted Labor before, we've had generations of Liberal voters in our family, but we're voting for you this time round. So that sense of really grievance over his role in the campaign has been very palpable amongst Liberal Party supporters in the region.
Right, well, look, thanks very much for your time this evening, Mike Kelly. I'll allow you to get back to your modest celebrations.
No worries, hopefully it'll be a big one later on.
Hello, you are with the ABC and you're looking at us in the election centre that we've set up in the ABC's headquarters in Sydney. It's currently about 20 to 8 on the East Coast. That means polls are going to be closing in about 20 minutes' time in the West. 19% of the vote has been counted, and at this stage there is a 2.6% swing to the ALP. Michael Disco Inferno Rowland is going to take us through that in a little bit more detail.
Yes, I'm going to save my best dance movements until later in the night, Lee. I've been promised a disco ball ahead later on. Now, I can show you the map of Australia. Each triangle represents each of the 150 seats in the House of Representatives. Along with the power of dancing, I have magical powers tonight. If I click my fingers, we can show you where the seats are falling so far. And there you see, based on the seat count, most of the East Coast at least lighting up in coalition blue, red representing the Labor seats, and the seat of Melbourne in Victoria being held by the Greens' Adam Bandt. Lots of chat, as you were just discussing there, about Tasmania. So let's have a breakout of how these seats in Tasmania, the 5 seats in Tasmania, are falling. And there we see the ABC is projecting the Labor Party to have a clean sweep of the 3 Liberal Party held seats, Bass, Browden and Lyons, to add to its existing seat of Franklin, and the Denison stronghold being held by Andrew Wilkie staying there. So the Labor Party certainly are doing very well in Tasmania. So let's walk over to the disco floor and drill down into the results, in particular in Tasmania, starting with the seat of Bass, held, as we see there, and by Andrew Nikolic since 2013. He is a former Army officer, although Ross Hart in the Labor Party, it looks as though he is going to win that seat and win that seat quite convincingly. Let's flick over now to the seat of Browden, and again another seat won by the Coalition in 2013 by Brett Whiteley. There you see a 5% swing to the Labor Party's Justine Key. On that basis, it's the ABC's prediction that's another Labor Party gain. And let's finish off our look at Tasmania with the seat of Lyons, held by Eric Hutchinson, also since 2013, and there you see a swing of about 3% to the Labor Party candidate, with, as you see, also a very significant number of the votes counted, 57% there. So at this stage, Tasmania, Lee, is certainly turning a shade of red.
Thank you very much, Michael. Let me just go, Annabelle, what have you got for us?
Well, it's time to take a look at Tasmania. It's obviously one of the states where there's a noticeable amount of early movement here, and good news for the ALP. We do have the Liberal member for Lyons standing by, Eric Hutchinson. He's coming to us from a subdued party background there. Eric, welcome to the program. Are you surprised by the amount of movement against the coalition we seem to be seeing in Tasmania? Can you hear me, Eric? I might need to speak up.
Look, I've got 2 voices coming through.
Okay. We'll give him a second just to see if we can get that audio sorted out. I'll tell you what I can do in the meantime, though. Often I know from when I've been sitting at home on election night watching, I'll be flipping around all of the various networks, and I'm here to tell you that you don't need to do that, because I have somebody out the back watching the other networks for us, and so I can tell you all the interesting things that they've got. So, George Brandis on Sky has said that it is very difficult for Jamie Briggs to hold Mayo from here, that they do not believe that he's going to be able to hold that seat and that it's been lost to the Nick Xenophon party. On Channel 9, Linda Burney has claimed the seat of Barton for the Labor Party. So there you go. You don't need to go anywhere. Just stick with us.
Can I add one that I think will win MacArthur? Congratulations to Mike Freelander and the rest of the campaign. I think we've got a good swing there. And Linda Burney, what a fantastic addition to the federal parliament. Good on you, Linda.
Right, let's have another crack at Tasmania and see if Eric Hutchinson, I can see from his nod that he's actually hearing me and only one of me, which is a great relief, I imagine. Eric Hutchinson, welcome to the broadcast, and it looks to be a different situation from what you might have anticipated in Tasmania tonight.
Annabelle, it's still very, very close, and certainly in the seat of Lyons, we're still right in this. We've got a number of the northern booths still to be counted, and I think it'll be very, very close. It always was going to be.
You and Andrew Nikolic in Bass and Brett Whiteley in Braddon are known colloquially as the Three Amigos. Were you expecting all three of you to be in trouble this evening?
Well, certainly it looks like Braddon and Bass they're doing it a little bit tough at the moment. But so in Lyons, look, as I say, we've still got a number of larger booths in northern Tasmania still to be counted. So, we're certainly not we're not giving up at this stage. It was always going to be very close, and that's how it's proving to be.
We're relying on you in this circumstance, Eric. You're the first Tasmanian we've come to interpret the state for us. So, what was going on there during the campaign? What could explain a movement like what we're seeing at the moment?
Well, there was a lot of very vulnerable people that were frightened by a whole series of lies. There's no question about that, and that seems to have had an impact. But look, as I say, we've got some time to play out here. I got an enormous swing in 2013, a 13.4% swing to win the seat from a 20-year sitting Labor Party member. So it was always going to be difficult. A 1.2% margin, obviously if there's a movement against that, it's going to be tough. But as I say, we've still got a number of larger booths in northern Tasmania to be counted, and we're certainly not giving up at this stage.
So were you hearing, Eric Hutchinson, a lot of feedback on the ground about the Labor Party's campaign on Medicare? Did you hear a lot of stuff about that?
Oh, clearly. I mean, it's been everywhere. I mean, they've been, robo-calling, pensioners at night time and vulnerable Tasmanians, and certainly that seems to have had an impact.
What about any of the coalition issues that Malcolm Turnbull was retailing? Were they catching hold in Tasmania?
Annabelle, look, absolutely Tasmania is in a better place today than it was 3 years ago. There's no question about it. Unemployment is significantly lower. When I was elected in 2013, it was over 8%. Today, it's 6.5%. There is a confidence in the state that simply wasn't there 3 years ago. We had Labor Green governments in Canberra. We had Labor Green governments in Hobart, and Tasmania has a renewed sense of optimism. But it does appear that, as I say, the scare campaign that was run by the Labor Party has had a significant impact.
And what do you see happening in other parts of Tasmania? What do you think about the Senate vote? Are you expecting to see a lot of support for minor candidates? There's a general swing across the continent to other candidates.
Annabelle, we'll just have to wait and see. Look, as I say, I'm focused on the people of Lyons, frankly, and I have been for the last 3 years. And if I'm given the honour of being re-elected, I'll continue to do that.
Right, we'll continue to monitor the situation throughout the evening. Thank you for joining us, Eric Hutchinson, tonight.
Thank you, Annabelle. Cheers.
Anthony, what have you got for us?
The first thing I'll say is we're in for a long night. The picture is still pointing there is a swing against the government, but there's a lot of seats that I still have in doubt. I mean, by this stage of the night, I've got 58 and 56 across the bottom of the screen there. It's just not budging above 60. So I've got enough seats that I'm just not prepared to give away. And that's why it's a bit peculiar. I mean, it looks like the government's on track for a majority, especially because we've still got WA to come in. But at this stage, we're still not calling it, but it's the seats. Some seats are falling, a lot are still in doubt. The swing isn't big enough to change government. But you'd say at this stage of the night, the government has its nose in front. And I think that's a strong statement to make. MacArthur is a seat that the Labor Party has gained. Mike Freelander on 54%. He's a local paediatrician down there. Russell Matheson on 34%. Now, this electorate was pushed around severely by the redistribution. It lost all the best Liberal votes in Camden, moved into the Campbelltown area, and clearly Labor has been able to tap into that traditional Labor vote in that area, which perhaps was disaffected at the last election. We look at the change in first preferences occurring there, big change in first preference votes, and that's then reflected in the two-party preferred swing. That's one of the biggest swings we're seeing in the country. So I think that is partly to do with the redistribution. I think sometimes when you get this rearrangement of electoral boundaries, you don't actually get a decent swing figure. You don't get a decent margin out of it. And this looks like one where the Labor vote was underestimated based on the redistribution.
He's also
Lindsay, on the other hand, 21% counted, 42% for the Liberal Party, 38% for Labor. This is not a seat where the Greens poll well. Marcus Cornish, who's directing preferences, the ex-Liberal member, has only got 2.4%. So he won't get public funding or his deposit back on those values, but he was there as directing preferences to Labor. But at this stage, we look at the change in votes occurring. There is a decline in the first preference vote. There's an increase in the vote for others because there has been a change there. The two-party preferred swing we're seeing is 4.4%. Just surprises me sometimes. It's got the Labor Party ahead. That figure, I don't know what polling places that's from, but at the moment, last time I looked at that figure a few minutes ago, the LNP, the Liberal Party were ahead. So I think that's just a bit of bouncing around, but which is exactly why we haven't given that seat away yet. But the figures were interesting there. Reid, Craig Laundy is well ahead there on Angelo Sarakas on the first preference votes. The change in first preference, that's the no swing that's occurring there. I was after the change in vote. Very little change on first preferences there, and the two-party preferred, very little change. So that's a Lib retain, and we're relatively confident in those numbers. So that's quite a good result there for Craig Laundy. So you're seeing a lot of variability from seat to seat, as we do with Macquarie. Louise Marcus is well ahead, but this is an electorate where you get a big vote for the Greens. And Louise Marcus has only got 40%. When you're in the low 40s, you're in trouble. The change in first preference vote that's occurring there, the Liberal vote has fallen substantially on first preferences. There are some others on the ballot paper this time. The two-party preferred swing we're seeing is 6.5%. Last time I looked, it was ALP ahead. The figure we got now says ALP gain, but certainly Macquarie is one of those seats well above that swing, but it's another one of those seats which was probably always a possibility. Susan Templeman, the Labor candidate, has run in that seat before. So at this stage, that looks like another gain for the Labor Party, but I'd like to come back and have a look at that one later. I think we can certainly give away Macarthur. I'd want to have a look at Macquarie in more detail. Bert Van Manen, again, there's that figure, 40%, 39% for the Labor Party, 6.3% for the Greens, 5.9% for some independents. There's a smattering of votes for other parties there. Look at the change in vote that's occurring. Not much change in first preference vote. The big change is the disappearance of the Palmer United vote, and that is all going to others and going to the Labor Party. The two-party preferred with swing is 4.6%, 50.2% ALP ahead. So that one's still in doubt in Ford. Herbert's been bouncing around, and the vote for the other parties and the change in the composition of the first preference vote has been an issue there. If we look at the change in vote that's occurred, it's a big drop in first preference vote. Palmer United, a huge increase in votes for others, which is One Nation. We're seeing a lot of change in the distribution of preferences in that electorate, and that's producing a swing, which at the moment is 8.6%, and the Labor Party's ahead. We're not giving that seat away. It's at this stage on the count we've got, it's still in doubt. So that's a dramatic result. Now, a few minutes ago, Longman was falling to the Labor Party, and I want to see these figures in more detail. 38% for the LNP, One Nation 9%, 4% there, 4.8% for the Greens. The change in first preference vote, big decline in the LNP vote. I think the Palmer vote has gone directly over to One Nation by the look of it, or sort of transmogrified through other parties. But it's that change in the preference flow is creating a 7.7% swing in the Labor Party's ahead. Now, the one thing I would say about Longman is that an electorate with several ends, there's a lot of population growth at one end, and I saw a lot of Burpengary figures. I think that's a seat we're coming back to. As I said, we haven't given that away, but there's a lot of counting in that seat. We're seeing, and this can happen, it's just this change in the preference flow has actually created a swing out of nowhere. The drop in first preference vote for Wyatt Roy is one of the problems there, but there's more counting to come in that electorate. But as I said, let me look at my screen updating. The coalition's ahead. The swing is about 2.5%, and the coalition has still got more seats than Labor.
It'd be useful to...
sorry, Penny.
I was just wondering if we could get where are we at in terms of what Labor wins you've declared to date. So
I can do. I think I have changing seats here somewhere. Seats changing. we're giving the Labor Party.
Braddon, Lyons, MacArthur, Macquarie.
Macquarie, Murray, of course, the national gain from the Liberal Party. Damien Drum, the new member for Murray. Macquarie we've added there, but again, let's
you couldn't be counting Macquarie.
It has bounced. And I think I've got some seats in doubt. I've got lots of seats in doubt. In fact, there are all sorts of seats in doubt. So that's why we're not calling the election yet, because there's so many seats still in doubt.
Let's bring Barry in. Barry, how are you reading things?
Yeah, well, I just want to underline the point that Anthony made, that it will be a long night before we know whether or not this government has a working majority. Let me just take you through a possible scenario. 3 seats lost to the government in Tasmania. Already, it seems as if Barton, Patterson, MacArthur, Eden Monaro, Gilmore and Macquarie, that's 6, have fallen in New South Wales, and yet we haven't got a clear picture yet on others like Robertson, Lindsay and Reid. But let's say 9. Tasmania, New South Wales, 9. Labor would have good prospects in Solomon and Hindmarsh. That takes you to 11. Keep in mind the magic figure is 15. Nick Xenophon could win 2 seats in South Australia. That takes you to 13. And that's assuming that the government holds all of their seats in Queensland, and that's without Western Australia in the mix. So that gives you a sense that this that the prospect of whether or not the government will have a working majority is one that I don't think we'll know the answer to that for maybe a couple of hours to come.
Scott Morrison?
Well, look, I don't think you can be counting seats like Robertson and Reid and even seats like Macquarie and even Gilmore at this stage. So I don't think people should get ahead of themselves on those sorts of things. I mean, the Tasmanian seats, I mean, you heard Eric say it himself in terms of how these votes still have to fall across a lot of the other branches out there. The result in MacArthur at the moment, that is very disappointing. And there's no other way to put it other than that. And I started the program by talking about the extraordinary work that was done by our 3 Tasmanian members. And if they were to hold those seats, then I can't think of what else they would have done over the last 3 years to do that. And that's why I think Eric has every reason to still be hanging in there, as does his colleagues.
Did we heard the Mike Kelly in Eden Monaro say that they were calling Peter Hendy a unicorn? He hadn't been seen and so forth. Did he not run a very good local campaign?
Oh, look, Eden Monaro is a tight seat. Mike lost it last time. So, you know, and
in the middle of a massive swing.
Mike didn't go to the press club. Mike didn't go to the press club to watch speeches while other people were out door knocking for him and standing on pre-poll.
Well, Peter was there supporting his Prime Minister. So, look, I think all of our candidates, I think everyone's been out there working very hard over the course of particularly the last 8 weeks, but over the last 3 years. And look, as these results come in, I mean, if you look in places like Victoria and if you look in Queensland, then Labor are just not making the ground in those 2 states that they would need to get to the magic numbers. And then you've got seats like Herbert, where there has been a big shift across to the Hanson vote. Where that goes, and does that come back to the coalition rather than go to the Labor Party after the distribution of preferences? We'll see. But in Queensland, then I'm just not seeing the volatile shift away from the government there. Or when you've got seats in Victoria, again like Chisholm, when we're holding seats like Dunkley and obviously Corangamite and all of that falling still with the government, then I think it continues to put us in a position to be able to form that government.
All right, well, let's go and have a look at one of the rural, or a group of the rural seats, and of course the one that we all know best, the perhaps the most willing contest that we've had throughout the course of this campaign has been the seat of New England, which pits Barnaby Joyce against Tony Windsor, who's making a comeback in that seat. So let's begin our regional seats run with that seat of New England, Barnaby Joyce against Tony Windsor.
28% of the vote counted, and Barnaby Joyce is well ahead. Now, I don't have polling place information from this electorate. We just have to go on the raw numbers here. But at the moment, 28% counted, 50% for Barnaby Joyce. I would presume that we haven't got a lot of Tamworth and Armidale boos at this stage, but still, he's far enough ahead on first preference. That's a preference count that we've got there. Look, I think that looks like a national retain, but you must remember Tony Windsor did have more support at one end of the electorate than the other because he used to represent the state seat of Tamworth. At this stage, we're giving it to Barnaby Joyce. That's probably a correct prediction, but I'm always much more cautious. So I think it looks like Barnaby Joyce is back. Yeah.
That's what we're hearing.
Yep. The seat of Murray Sharman-Stone's retiring. Duncan McKechnie is the new Liberal candidate, and Damien Drum, who's an MLC in the state parliament, or has been,